Remember Unit 20 was our environmental concerns. And we left talking about asbestos. We talked about lead-based paint, and we're in the throes of our discussion of radon. So we're going to pick back up with radon in just a second. I would like all of you to set a private chat just to me. Set a private chat just to me. And I'd like to hear from everybody in a private chat. When we're referring to lead-based paint, we require a lead-based paint addendum required on any property built prior to what year? What is the magic year that we need to know when it comes to lead-based paint? We have the lead-based paint hazard addendum. And we use this addendum anytime we have a property built prior to, and you're reminding me in a private chat what that magic year is. So the magic year, y'all write this down real big. You don't only know this for your test, but also for your career. The magic year when it comes to lead-based paint is 1978, 1978. So anything built prior to 1978, of course, anything built prior to 1978 requires a lead-based paint. If the seller knows, if the seller somehow learns that there is, in fact, if the owner, I need to say, let me start over. If the owner of a property somehow knows that there's lead in the home, then they have a duty to disclose it. We're going to learn as we get into Unit 7 today, the seller doesn't have to disclose much. But this lead-based paint is like the exception, bless you. The lead-based paint is like the exception. So anything built prior to 1978, once the seller knows, and I don't care how they learn, how they know about it, once they know about it, then they have to disclose. If the seller has had contracted work, then the paid contractors should know to have it sent off and have it tested and provide reports. That would be what the seller has to disclose. But guys, if the seller's a do-it-yourselfer, if they paint themselves, they may or may not know that they need to send off. Please always keep in mind, especially as we go through this unit, the seller and the agent can only disclose what we know. If I don't know, I can't disclose. So if the seller's never had it tested, then they don't know for sure. Okay, and understand what this addendum says. It does not say, oh dear, your home was built prior to 1708, you have lead in it. That's not what I'm telling you. This form says because your home was built prior to 1978, it may have lead in it. It's meant to be a seller disclosure and a buyer acknowledgement. The buyer should have the opportunity to have it tested should they choose. The buyer should be provided literature so they can learn about the possible dangers of lead in the home. And remember what we said last week too, lead poisoning specifically affects children. So those little developing bodies, those little developing organs, pregnant women as well, the developing child. I do want to point out, we look at a few forms in this class, but certainly not all of them. So we kind of introduce you to the idea, to the topic, getting more involved in forms. Obviously, once you get into your career and you start working with them every day, but also we'll see them in more in post-licensing. With that being said, we do have the forms available because I know some of you want to see them. I know some of you are curious. So I just wanted to point out, if you guys are in the online learning system, by the way, has everybody signed in and created an account with the online learning system? I'm assuming the rest of you just don't feel like putting your hand up. Okay. If you haven't done so already, please, please, please create this account. And you'll notice in the welcome section, we have a tab here called 2022 forms. This is the last update that we have. They usually update them like July or so. So right now, the last update we have is July 2022. And when you click on the link, you're taken to every single form provided us by NCAR. Don't look at all these. You'll spend more study time on these than what you need to. But if you want to search, you could just do lead, and you're going to see the lead-based paint hazard addendum comes up. Again, you're not going to be asked specifically, you're not going to be tested on this form. We need to know that it's here, know that what it's about, what it does. But I do want to point this out to you because some of you may have a better understanding about it by looking at the form. So it's available. This is the most we're going to look at it in class. Any form we talk about in this class is going to be under. Everybody see this? If you go to welcome and then down here at the bottom, 2022 forms, you just click on the link. So we talked about asbestos. We talked about lead-based paint. Oh, and by the way, one more thing about lead-based paint and then I'm done, I promise. When we talk about lead-based paint, we talk about the owner of a property. Everybody understand the owner has to disclose whether we're in a for sale situation or a for rent situation. So if you have an owner that wants to start acting as a landlord and they want to rent their unit out, if their home out and they know of lead in the home, they need to disclose that to the tenants, particularly if the tenants have children, they're going to live there. They need to help educate them so they're aware of the possible dangers of lead in the home. All right, moving on. So where we left the other day, last week, was talking about radon. And radon, we said, was the byproduct of decaying matters in the ground. And as those matters decay, they release a gas into the atmosphere. And that gas is known as radon. You can't smell it, you can't see it, you can't taste it. Radon's everywhere because you're always going to have decaying matters in the ground. And typically, because radon's everywhere, it's not a concern until the radon levels are more than 4.0 picocuries. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, is how they gauge and determine radon. So I think we mentioned last week, the buyer may choose to have, once they're under contract, they may choose to have the home tested for radon. If they do, a lot of our home inspectors are certified to do that. So they set this contraction up in the home, and every hour it takes like a snapshot of the radon level. So what's the radon level at 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m., right? Every hour it takes like a snapshot of the radon level. And at the end of 2 or 3 days, just however long the kit is left there, then they pull like an average. So if that average over the 2 or 3 days is more than 4.0 picocuries, then the suggestion is that you put in a radon mitigation system, and that's this thing running up the side of the house. It's drilled into the house, and these little fans, there's fans in this pipe, and it's pulling the air out of the house up into the atmosphere where it belongs. So radon is a very treatable. Some of you may have a radon mitigation system in your home. If you're helping buyers and you see a radon mitigation system, it still wouldn't be bad advice to encourage them to have it tested, or you to have it tested, because these little fans that pull the air don't last forever. So when the fans stop working, then the radon mitigation system. Does every house have one of these? No. Nope. Some builders are starting to build with them. Think about, ventilation. Again, houses need to breathe. And you think about the new construction we're building these days, it's so dang tightly sealed. Like, you're not going to let any air go through the windows or the doors, right? That also doesn't allow anything from the inside to escape. So some builders, not all of course, but some builders are starting to build with a radon mitigation system. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect the little fans. Those fans never last forever. So if you have one, or if you see one with your buyer, it doesn't hurt just to have this conversation and give them the option to have it tested. Please remember, we're going to talk about the buyer's inspection period, the things that the buyer should consider doing while we're under contract. We're getting there, so bear with me. So 4.0 picocuries, anything above that is considered undesirable. Here's just a map just to show you the deeper purple out west. They tend to have higher levels of radon than the lighter purple down at the coast. Think about the difference in the ground. You know, when you get up to the mountains, it's rockier. You get down to the coast, it's more sand, it's softer. So I think a lot of the radon down the coast absorbs better, whereas in the mountains, it doesn't have anywhere to go. With that being said, you guys, please hear me. Radon is everywhere. So if you live down in the coast, please don't feel like you have to worry about radon. If you live up in the mountains or you're helping a buyer up the mountains, don't look at them and say, oh, I guarantee you have radon. The only way to know for sure is to have it tested. One house could have it tested and have no radon issues. The house next door could have it tested and have radon issues. So please just have this conversation. And when it comes to radon, let's talk about what the commission says our role in it. As a broker, the Real Estate Commission has weighed in. I can only disclose what I know. And once I find out that the radon level is more than 4.0 picocuries, I have a duty to disclose. We're going to talk about disclosures and material facts. We'll tie all this back in just a bit. But as the broker, once we learn of radon that's more than 4.0 picocuries, we do have a duty to disclose. Again, if you're working in residential sales or property management, if you're viewing a home with a buyer, or you're getting ready for a listing appointment and you're looking at a home and you see a radon mitigation system, the fact that it has a radon mitigation system is not a material fact. Ideally, if this thing is working right, radon's not an issue. Again, remember last week we introduced you guys to the idea of your little red flag? So when you see this radon mitigation system, your little red flag should go up. And what that little red flag is telling you is to encourage your buyers and your tenants, particularly, to possibly have it tested, buyers especially, to have it tested, ask questions, try to learn more about it. So remembering this is the unit that makes us like just terrified to breathe the air that we breathe. Another super scary thing we have out there in the environment is formaldehyde. This is found in pressed wood products. So think like plywood, particle board, for example. Formaldehyde can also be found in foam insulation. It can be found in certain glues. My High Point people, there are 2 times a year that we have market, don't we? Who knows what kind of formaldehyde we got going on in High Point with all those furniture manufacturers and companies in town. I had a pre-licensing student a couple classes ago said that she'd recently bought a bed, and the bed came with a tag with a big red warning on it that said product may contain formaldehyde. So the glues that they use to make that bed. Again, it's about helping to educate the consumers. If they have a bunch of questions or concerns about formaldehyde, send them to the EPA's website. EPA is generally the best place to start. Formaldehyde's not banned. It just comes with a warning. Let me rephrase. It was banned at one point in early 80s. It was banned, but since then it's been reduced to a warning because there's inconclusive evidence about physical harm. So it just comes with a warning. Another scary thing we got is carbon monoxide poisoning. This one scares me all the time. Carbon monoxide is the result of an incomplete fuel combustion. And that incomplete fuel combustion shoots off a carbon monoxide. It gets into the air. We breathe the air. We're breathing that carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide has been coined the silent killer because with carbon monoxide poisoning, Unfortunately, victims go to sleep that night and they just never wake up in the morning. There's nothing to smell, there's nothing to see, there's nothing to alert them to the fact that there's carbon monoxide, that they're suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. If you do not have a carbon monoxide detector in your home, please make a separate note right now, go out after class and get one. I want all of you guys to have one, because if you have issues, you need to be alerted. Y'all remember the families in Boone? You remember that hotel in Boone? When was that? 10 years ago, 12 years ago? Two families died in a room in Boone before they realized what it was. The first family, they said, well, that's kind of weird. The second family said, we need to investigate. Sure enough, they found carbon monoxide. So y'all in your shopping list, y'all promise me in your shopping list, you'll go out and get one of these, protect you and your family. Everybody promise? Julie, I promise. One of the easiest things you can do. Another thing we have is electromagnetic fields. These are any of our power lines, power poles, power fields. They emit a current. The closer the home is to a power line or a power pole, the more at risk they may be. Electromagnetic fields, the jury's still out on the possible health complications. So these are, again, a warning. If your buyer is getting ready to buy and they have concerns about electromagnetic fields nearby, we can always, or they can always contact the power company and have them come out and do an EMF test. EMF, electric magnetic field. Request that from the power company. Question then about carbon monoxide and age of the home. Yeah, anytime you have incomplete fuel combustion, age of the home doesn't matter. Have you guys ever stood near one of these things? One of these electromagnetic, it's weird. Like you can feel it, like the little arms on your hand stand. It's weird. I had buyers interested in a house next door, and I asked them, I told them, I said, this, you know, sometimes you're driving down and you see like a row of these things that go as far as the eye can see. So their home was next to one of them. And I told them before we showed it, I said, they said, well, we're not really sure how we feel about it. Can we go see it? And I said, of course. And we got out of the car and they were pretty much like, nope. Just that weird, eerie, you could like hear it and feel it. I said, all right, let's go. Now we know, right? Another scary thing we have out there is groundwater contamination. Anytime our groundwater gets contaminated, maybe it's some kind of spill or a leak, maybe it's from buried products, buried materials in the ground, septic tanks, underground storage tanks, we're going to talk about those next. Anytime the ground gets contaminated, particularly the groundwater, that groundwater will eventually run to the city's water supply that eventually becomes our drinking water. So to get the groundwater contaminated can affect so many people. So groundwater contamination, surface spills, buried materials, leaks. Our groundwater is our drinking water is actually quite fragile. While you guys are carbon monoxide shopping, get you a couple gallons of emergency water, just in case, have that on handy. We had a E. coli scare in High Point a couple years ago. After that, I bought water. I learned. Another thing that could affect the environment is underground storage tanks, also known as USTs. A lot of these old underground storage tanks were made of steel. In time, steel corrodes. As it corrodes, it may form a hole. If it forms a hole, then whatever's in that underground storage tank is going to get out to our groundwater. If it gets into the groundwater, whatever the contaminants are that leaked, if it gets into the groundwater, when they find this contamination, they're going to trace it back to the owner, wherever it started, originated, and that owner is going to be responsible for cleanup. They're going to be reliable for cleanup. Now, there's funds out there, there are resources, there are programs to assist with the cleanup. But guys, sometimes you know that there's an underground storage tank. If you're ever walking in a backyard with a buyer or a seller and you trip over a pipe coming out the ground, little red flags should go up, right? Ask some questions. You know that pipe's coming from somewhere, and more than likely where that pipe is coming from is it's attached to an underground storage tank. Here's the problem though. Many years ago, we thought the solution for unused or abandoned storage tanks was just to bury them. Out of sight, out of mind, right? No problem. Well, it's estimated today, and this is just an estimate, nobody knows for sure. It's estimated today that there are millions, that's with an M, millions of underground storage tanks in this country that nobody knows about. We just buried them to get rid of them. Again, the problem is in time they corrode. This is another one of these things that got really big really fast with disciplinary action with the Real Estate Commission. Again, little red flags. You trip over a pipe, ask some questions. And this does take the professional to clean up because everybody's involved. There's federal laws on cleanup, there's state laws. But there is funding available. I don't know that you need to know the North Carolina Leaky Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Act. We're going to see that again when we get to page 510, so I wouldn't worry about that so much. Know that there are acts, there are protocols. So in other words, you can't run out there with your funnel and kitty litter and say you can take care of it. It's more involved than that. As we said, they may store petroleum, gas, oil, whatever you need to fuel the home. When it comes to underground storage tanks, again, the commission's weighed in. We have to disclose what we know. So once you learn of an underground storage tank, it makes no difference to me how you learn about it. That tends to be the number one. Well, how are you going to know? Makes no difference to me. Somehow you learn about it. Maybe the owner tells you, maybe the buyer has an inspection. Once we learn about it, we have a duty to disclose it. And if we know about it, the buyer should be encouraged to investigate it while they're under contract. Again, talking about that process. We're getting there. There's a fascinating story in your book on page 505, the example. Please don't read that now, but make yourself a note to read that for example. Kind of the big picture of what kind of damage these underground storage tanks can do. Another environmental concern is waste disposal sites, also known as our landfills. Landfills were either the leftover of a surface mining project, or they were dug specifically for the purpose of being a landfill. Landfills have like controlled drainage. So as all that garbage starts to deteriorate, do we call it garbage juice, is controlled. It has somewhere to go. So it's not just sinking into the ground and contaminating the groundwater. These things are highly regulated, federal, state, and local. Some buyers have concerns about living near a landfill. Has anybody ever been near a landfill or driven by a landfill on a hot August day? It doesn't smell real good, does it? Best way to know if your buyer's getting ready to buy during a landfill? Google Maps. Plug in the address, zoom out, see what's around. If it's near a landfill, let them know. Some buyers it bothers, some it doesn't. Another one we got, and probably a bigger one, is mold. Mold's everywhere. Mold spores are everywhere. Why don't y'all take a big deep breath with me? In through the nose, out through the mouth. Ready? I guarantee you just breathed in some kind of mold spore. It's everywhere. And what does that mean? You're breathing it anyway. Mold spores are everywhere, you guys. Not all mold spores are bad. I mean, it ranges from the mold you get in that loaf of bread that you've had on your counter for too long, the whole way to black toxic mold and everything in between. So there's a lot of variants, a lot of strains. All mold needs is a little bit of moisture and oxygen, and it will grow rapidly. Whenever you are aware of water damage or previous water damage, maybe the roof leak, maybe the bathroom flooded, that should be a little red flag for us. Ask some questions. Sometimes you might walk into, have you ever walked into a basement, like a cement basement, and thought to yourself, it smells basement-y down here? There's no such smell as basement-y. Probably what you're smelling is some kind of mild or mildew, particularly after, I said concrete, but an unfinished basement, particularly after a big storm, lots of rain. Ventilation can help dry mold out. If it's severe enough, okay, but please remember the rules to be counted present. If it's severe enough, we need to call in the professionals. Again, a bottle of bleach isn't going to fix it. Please don't always be the hero. I know we all have access to YouTube. I know we can all run out to Lowe's and buy some bleach. That doesn't make us the experts. When it comes to mold, once again, what's our responsibility? The mere presence of mold isn't a material fact because mold's everywhere. It doesn't become a material fact unless you have an excessive amount. And the commission defines that excessive amount as anything more than a square foot. I think bottom line, if you walk into a room and it smells moldy, that would be an excessive amount. If you walk into a room and you can see it on a wall, for example, that would be an excessive amount. Again, I'm not a mold expert, but I do need to be able to identify the signs. The biggest red flag that goes up is either water damage, previous water damage. So let's wrap this up. We talked about the EPA. A lot of the environmental issues in your book on page 509, again, this is just more of an FYI. But with environmental issues, we have something called the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, also known as CERCLA. As we mentioned, there is funding available to help. But keep in mind, it's the owner that's responsible for the cleanup. So let's go back to the underground storage tank. Let's say there's an underground storage tank in the yard and nobody ever knew about it. The seller, the buyer, who they bought it from, nobody knew about it. And then one day that corrodes and it causes a leak and the oil contaminates not only the owner's yard, but the neighbor's yard and the neighbor next to them and the neighbor next to them. Once they discover the contamination and they find the source, the owner's going to be liable for cleanup. And this is where CERCLA, this is where some of these fundings can come in. Just make a note, pages 510 and 511. CERCLA offers others. There's our Leaky Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Act, Coastal Area Management Act, Mountain Ridge Protection Act, Dredge and Fill Act, and Sediment Pollution Control Act. So lots of acts available to help with various environmental concerns. Again, I don't want you guys studying 510, 511. I just want you to be aware that these acts are here, they're available. So we can help direct our buyer, point our buyers and sellers in the right direction if and when one of these concerns come up. So as we mentioned, liability of these environmental issues, when they do become an issue, the liability is going to be on the owner. It's our responsibility. I can't make anybody do anything. But what I can do is try to point them in the right direction, let them know where they can learn, gather the information, and how to proceed. So the owner carries the most liability. Guys, we are the broker, not totally off the hook. We need to, our biggest responsibility when it comes to environmental issues is to disclose. I have to disclose what I know. Getting more into this conversation when we get into Unit 7, introduce you guys to Unit 7. I always have a duty to disclose. We're going to talk about this improper disclosure. What are my consequences if I don't properly disclose? We're going to talk about that when we get into Unit 7. And guys, I'm not an environmental expert. It's not my job out there to run around and discover environmental concerns. It's my job to disclose once I know. The seller lets you know, the owner lets you know, the buyer finds something in their inspection. Now we have a material fact on our hand that we have to disclose. And that gets us through Unit 20. Lots of green stars in Unit 20, which means we're not spending all of our study time in Unit 20. You may have a test question or two. I think this is more in practice. If you're working with buyers, they have questions about radon. Now we know where to direct them. But you may have a few test questions, so don't ignore Unit 20. Those key terms, knowing what those key terms mean back at the beginning of the unit on page 497. Your key point review, the summary, is on page 512, and your student quiz is on page 515. Questions on Unit 20. right. Moving right along. Y'all want a Kahoot? Let's play a game. All right, y'all get your phones. Run and grab it if you don't have it. I know they stay tethered to us, don't they? They're close by. So this Kahoot, here's our QR code. QR code is the fastest way to get in. If you downloaded the app or went to the website, you'll need a PIN. The PIN for this game is 746-6496. This Kahoot is on units 4, 5, and 6. 4, 5, and 6. You see you guys starting to come in. Again, I'm fine with you using nicknames. Just keep it clean. Ooh. If you use a nickname, I may ask you who you are. If that's the case, you can just tell me in a private chat. That'll just be between us. But you don't have to if you don't want to. Just a few more seconds to get in. Remember, if your phone goes to sleep, it's gonna kick you out. So just wake your phone back up. Okay. Anybody in that wants to play? If you don't want to play in Kahoot, that's fine. You just follow along, like guess in your mind. You know if you got it right or wrong. That's what we want, is for us to know what the right answer is and understand why we got it right or wrong. So, everybody ready to Kahoot? This is on units 4, 5, and 6. You were for a second. Question number 1, the system of a legal description that defines a parcel of land by its parameter is the Five seconds. So the legal description defines by the parameter the tour of the property is the meets and bounds. Remember, we start and finish with the point of beginning. So we start at the point of beginning and we walk from monument to monument to monument until we get back to the point of beginning. Rectangular survey system is the grid system that they use out west. Questions on this one? Right, let's see who got it right the fastest. Nicole came out the gate, followed by Bernice, Carrie Bear, Joe, and Crystal. The heat is on. Question number 2. In North Carolina real estate transaction, excise taxes are the responsibility of the Five seconds. In North Carolina, who pays excise tax? The seller. It was a 50-50 toss-up, wasn't it? I let y'all, I can't tell you how much I love you guys. Some of you may have no idea what the excise tax is, but dang it, I'm not paying it. Real estate agent isn't paying it, right? So the excise tax is the tax that the seller has to pay when they sell their home. Remember, they tax you when you buy it, they tax you during the time you own it, and guess what? They're going to get you one more time when you sell it. And that one more time is the excise tax. Questions on this one? Unit 5. See, Nicole's staying up top on top. Crystal came up, Carrie Bear, Joe, and Bernice. Looks like those same 5 just kind of toggled around. Kim T is our highest climber this round. They're up 7 places. Good job. Question number 3. Which of the following deeds contains no express or implied warranties? No warranties. Five seconds. The no warranty deed is the quitclaim deed. Quitclaim deed. Quitclaim deed says what I got, you get. So if I got nothing, what you getting? Absolutely nothing. We talked about the quitclaim deed as being used for maybe to correct a mistake, maybe to convey property from a single person once they become married, or married people that are getting divorced, for example. General warranty deed has the most warranties. General warranty deed has the most warranties. We talked about those 5 warranties or covenants. Questions on this one? Nicole's not budging. Carrie Bear's coming up. Bernice is up. Joe and Kim T are up. Dimples is our highest climber. They're up 6 places. Question number 4. Which of the following is an essential element of a valid North Carolina deed? Three seconds. So let's look on page 87. Everybody, please turn with me to page 87. And on page 87, we talked about the requirements for a valid deed. Remember, when we're talking about the validity of any document, what we're saying is, how will the judge perceive this document? Will the judge determine if it's valid or not? And when the judge is trying to determine if it's valid or not, they're looking for these essential elements that you see on the top of page 87. So a valid deed must contain, there does need to be some kind of words of conveyance. The seller has to, or let me do better, the grantor has to state that they wish to convey the property to the grantee. And there will actually be words to that effect on the deed. Now turn with me to page 88. Are elements that are often found, but the judge isn't looking for them when they're determining if the deed is valid or not. Do we record? Shake your head, yes or no. Do we record our deeds? Do we record? Shake your head, yes or no. Yeah, absolutely we record. But we don't record because the judge is trying to figure out if the deed is valid or not. The reason we record is because somebody known as the Connor Act tells us that it has to be recorded to be enforceable. Everybody with me? The judge doesn't care if it's recorded or not when they're trying to determine the validity. Remember we talked about cake ingredients? You got to have certain ingredients to bake a cake, but then you can also add to the cake. Icing, sprinkles, ice cream. The add to the cake is what we're looking at on page 88. It helps, but it's not required. What questions do I have on this one? I really do recommend a side-by-side comparison. Take your notebook paper, draw a line down the middle. Left-hand side are essential elements, right-hand sides are the sprinkles and the ice cream and the cake. So you can see what the judge is looking for to determine if the deed is valid versus the other things that we can add to it on page 88. Questions? This is going to shake things up. Let's see what we got now. Nope, Nicole's not bothered by this. She's staying on top and on fire this round. Bernice is still on. Kim, Rhonda came up. Nana came up. Nicole's on fire. You should see a little fire sign on your phone, I think. Question number 5, restrictive covenants. Six seconds. Here we go. Restrictive covenants apply to and bind all successive owners of the property. Restrictive covenants are appurtenant. To answer this question, we had to know what appurtenant meant. What does appurtenant mean? It means they run with the land. The developer imposes them, they start them, they create them when they create the subdivision. Once the developers built the last home and they're out of that subdivision, they're on to the next subdivision, the covenants remain. They stick to the very first owner, the second owner, the 15th owner, and so on. Questions on this one? So we got, we got some competition now. Bernice and Nicole, Carrie Bear, Joe and Rhonda. Nolan's our highest climber up this round. You should see a little sign with a flag on top of the mountain. Number 6, the primary intent of zoning ordinances. Primary intent. Six seconds. Primary intent is to control the land, how we use the land. Can we use it for residential? Can we use it for commercial? Are there setback restrictions? Protect. We did talk about a buffer zone, which is what this green is referring to. And that's exactly what a buffer zone does, is it protects residential neighborhoods from commercial encroachment, unsightliness. But that's not why we have zoning ordinances. The reason we have zoning ordinances is to tell all of us, residential, commercial, how we can use our land. And remember, you guys, that what's wrong with the blue one? Zoning is local in nature, so you don't have any statewide. There's no such thing as a statewide zoning ordinance or a statewide zoning regulation. Winston-Salem regulates Winston-Salem zoning. Greensboro, Charlotte, they all have their own zoning. The state doesn't get involved. Questions on this one? There's Bernice and Nicole again. This last round is going to get interesting. Joe and Rhonda, Kim, Dimples is our highest climber, up 4 places. All right, last one. Here we go. Which of the following best describes a variance? Five seconds. Best describes a variance and exception to the zoning ordinance. Show me how many property owners can request a variance. How many? You guys got it. Just one. With a variance, one and only one, always only one. Owner is going to the zoning board and they're asking permission to break the rules. They're proving to the zoning board that your zoning ordinance causes me a hardship and it prevents me from using my land. And if a variance is granted, what they've been given is an exception. They've been given permission to break the rules. One property owner, and they've got to prove a hardship. Just because you wanna is not a hardship. Questions? Remember, we're recording. I get asked a lot if you can go back in Kahoot on your own outside of class. And the answer is absolutely you can, because we're recording. So you can go back through. All right. The grand finale, the podium winners. Who gets a candy bar today? Third place is Rhonda. She came up a little bit. Second place is Bernice. And our first place is Nicole. I got fourth and fifth runners up of Kim T and Crystal. Good job, everybody. Go candy bar shopping this afternoon. Questions? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and take our first break. And when we come back, Unit 7, here we go. All right. We're back. How we doing? Ready to talk about some agency? Woo. Okay, so I'm going to take attendance. Before we jump into agency, let me shut this down so that flashing doesn't drive you nuts. Before we jump into agency, I want to introduce you guys to something that we're going to be discussing and talking about pretty much from here on out in this class. And what I'm introducing you guys to is something called North Carolina License Law and Commission Rule. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. But one of the things I want to do right now as I introduce you to license law and commission rule is tell you your resources. Where can you access, where can you find these license laws and commission rules as we start discussing them in class. Before I show you where to find them, let me show you where first not to go. And where we're not going to verify, where we're not going to look for license law and commission rule is in your textbook, starting on page 569. 569 of your book is Appendix A. We're not going to look up license law and commission rule there. The reason being is because it's out of date. Drives me nuts that they put forms in your books, because as soon as they put a form in your book, it's out of date. The form updates, the license law and commission rule, for example, updates, and now you just got wasted paper there. So everybody promise me we're not going to look at Appendix A in our textbook. Everybody good? Everybody with me so far? Okay. So where can we find the current license law and commission rule? Well, we got a couple resources for you guys. First off, if you look at the online learning system, the left-hand scroll bar shows you the various units. You guys see, so we got the various units that we're working in. And near the bottom, one of the last things that we're going to discuss is license law and commission rule. They've provided a nice PDF. The commission has provided a nice PDF. This is one resource. This is one place. I will always have the current information in the online learning system. So whenever you see a form in your book, ignore it in your book. We'll look at it in the online learning system. Whenever we talk about license law and commission rule, ignore Appendix A. We can find it in the online learning system. So license law and commission rule. You will notice, because this is a chapter in the online learning system, we're going to spend time. This is the very last thing that we go over in this class is license law and commission rule. This is the big portion of your state specific exam because it's specific to us, to North Carolina. This may not be the easiest resource for you guys. Do you see how everything in here is like dual column? It's kind of hard to read if you're looking on a computer screen. You have it available and you can look at it here. But I also want to point out, I think this is the easiest place to access it. Y'all write down this website. This is ncrec.gov. Or if you just start Googling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, this is their website. Again, we're introducing you to these sources. We're going to spend a little bit more time in the commission's website. There's some good information in here. Don't spend all your study time here, but use it for resources. So we're at ncrec.gov, which is the Real Estate Commission's website. And on the home page, to have everybody on the home page, if you scroll down, there's a tab of license law and rules. Again, this is always the current, and this is the difference between this and what's on the online learning system. They break it down into license law and commission rule. There are two different things going on. License law is like general statute. License law is like state laws not created by the commission, but created by our governing body. Commission rules are rules created by the Real Estate Commission. They are a governing body that has the power to create rules. So for example, let's say you want to look up a rule that we're going to talk about, that we're getting there and we're going to talk about. When you come to the rules, click on that little link. It's going to give you the number and the topic. So this way, when we talk about delivery of instruments, you don't have to worry about this dual column thing. I think it's a lot easier to find it here. I'm going to reference the license law and commission rules so you guys can look it up as another resources. Make sure you're comfortable. Some of the license law and commission rule I provide to you guys in our Campbell folder in the online learning system. I will show you what's there when we get there. Again, we're just introducing you. As we get into agency, we're going to start talking about license law and commission rule, and we're pretty much referencing it here throughout the class. So we're either looking in the online learning system under license law and commission rule, or on ncrec.gov, license law and rule. Again, I'm going to reference laws. I'm going to reference rules. Some I think are more important for you guys to sit down and read than others. Has anybody ever sat down and tried to read law before? Whipped out a law book and sat down and thought you were going to read? It's not an easy read, is it? So I'm going to encourage you guys to kind of break it up. Please don't think you're going to sit down and read this all in one sitting, which is why we break it up in class so you can absorb it. So those are our resources. So now let's jump into Unit 7. And before we actually jump in, Unit 7 is brokerage relationships, law and practice. Unit 7 defines our agency relationship. What is my relationship between the buyers and the sellers, particularly? Unit 7 is heavy focused on residential sales. We're going to talk a lot about working with buyers and sellers. Please remember, brokerage relationships, law and practice also applies to property managers when you're working with homeowners. I got a whole unit dedicated to property management. That's Unit 12. So for simplicity, we're focusing just on residential sales, that relationship in Unit 7. So we're going to explain agency. We're going to define agency. We're going to explain agency. We're going to talk about the different types of relationships. We're going to differentiate between a customer and a client and what my role is for each. I have different duties and responsibilities depending on who you are. If you're my customer, I owe you certain things. If you're my client, I owe you certain things. I need to know our relationship so I know how to proceed. We're going to get into this thing that we've danced around called a material fact. We're going to talk about what is a material fact, what is not a material fact, and my duty to disclose material facts to the consumer. And then we're going to talk about working with real estate agents and me disclosing my status. The consumer has a right to know where I am in this transaction, who I represent, and that's our working with real estate agent disclosure. As I mentioned last week, you guys, Crystal, where is that? Is that in the online learning system? Okay, thank you. And it might be tried again on break, because sometimes if it doesn't work now, it may work in a few minutes. That's, we're getting an invalid PDF on the online learning system. So if you ever get a hiccup on that, I mean, mine worked. But if you ever get a hiccup on that, maybe refresh or try it again a few minutes later and it might work. If not, though, please let us know. We absolutely want to make sure you guys have those resources. So remember we talked last week. We've spent the last, 2 weeks going through 7 units, Unit 1 through 6 and 20. We've blown through 7 units in 2 weeks. We're going to be all of this week and possibly some in the next week on Unit 7. So while it may seem that we're slowing down, The truth is Unit 7 is very in-depth. There's a lot of information in Unit 7. Be honest with me. You know the true answer to this, but be honest with me. How many of you looked at Unit 7 before class today? Few of you. Okay. I'm trying to prepare you for the complexity. Remember, I told you guys, Units 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested units. It's probably our next 2-3 weeks are going to be in-depth, heavily tested topics. Before we get into Unit 7, before we start looking at our book, I just want to introduce you guys to some ideas to help you better start understanding Unit 7, to help you wrap your brain around this idea of agency. So y'all put your pencils down. Put your pencil down, please. I promise you, everything in the next few slides I'm going to show you, we're going to see in a future unit or future page. But I just want to introduce you to some ideas. So if I could get everybody just to listen for a few minutes. We're going to introduce you to something called caveat emptor. Caveat emptor is Latin for let the buyer beware. North Carolina is a caveat emptor state, which means it is the buyer's responsibility to know what's going on with the property before they buy. It's the buyer's responsibility to learn about the property. The seller doesn't have to disclose much. The seller is not required to disclose. Pretty much the only thing I know of is if they know of lead in the home, anything built prior to 1978. Other than that, the seller doesn't have to disclose. The real estate agent does not get to hide behind caveat emptor. We're going to learn that we always have a duty to disclose, and we're going to talk about that. Let's call it a disconnect between seller that doesn't want to disclose and agent that has a duty to. So we're going to talk about that. Caveat emptor, the onus to learn about the property is on the buyer. In a real estate relationship, the consumer hires the firm, not the individual agent. Our agency relationships are between the client and the firm. My firm allows me to work with their seller. My firm allows me to work with their buyer. The buyer's not hiring me. The buyer is hiring the firm. Now I run around, we all do, talking about my seller and my buyer. That's not accurate. The relationship is between the firm. Please understand, you guys, all firms are different. They have different ways that they operate, different ways that they handle your commission, for example. We're going to talk about your commission. They're all a little bit different. So a lot of times I get questions, does the firm have to do this? Does the firm have to do that? The only thing the firm has to do is follow license law and commission rule. Other than that, they're pretty much free to set up and operate any way that they want. We're going to talk in Unit 7 about you guys affiliating with a firm. We'll talk about what you may want to look for, things that you may want to consider when you're trying to decide a real estate firm to join. I'm always going to encourage you guys to shop around. Talk to 2, if not 3 full firms, so you can compare them, understanding going into this that they're all different. So the rules and regulations of how you, the agent that's affiliated with a firm, works with their seller or buyer, a lot of times may be up to firm policy. What we need to understand right now is that the consumer hires the firm, not the agent. Another thing to understand early is that in North Carolina, homes are sold as is, which means the seller's not required to do repairs. Can they agree to do a repair? Can the buyer ask and the seller say, yeah, sure, I'll do that? Of course they can. Hear me when I say they're not required to. The buyer may ask the seller, fix this or correct that. The seller's under no obligation. let me just go ahead and get this out here. I'm going to put this out here in the universe. You guys ready for what's potentially some shocking news? There is no such thing as a perfect home. All homes have problems and issues and something wrong with them. Humans built them. Humans are not perfect. Even brand new construction has problems. The seller's not required, because it's an as-is state. The seller's not required. In most real estate transaction, the seller pays commission to the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever's bringing the buyer. Maybe it's an agent from a different firm. Maybe it's an agent within the same firm. In Unit 7, we're going to talk about working with agents in different firms. We're going to talk about working with agents within the same firm. But typically, the listing agreement shows how much the seller is going to pay. And then the listing firm shares their commission with whomever brought the buyer. Again, we're going to get into your commission. Everything you guys want to know about your commission is in Unit 8. I'm going to ask that we refrain from a bunch of commission questions in Unit 7. I'm getting there. Before I can get you guys paid, we got to form and create these agency relationships. Everybody with me? So please, if you want to know all about your commission, it's right there in Unit 8. I'm getting there. As real estate agents, we are fact finders only. I cannot make anybody do anything. I can't look at a buyer and say, you are going to buy this house. You're going to pretend that you're okay with the radon, like it or not, and you're going to buy this house as it is. That's not my job. My job isn't to boss people around. My job is to help provide the facts so my client can make an informed decision. I'm helping them gather the information. We usually refer to as buyer's agents and seller's agents, maybe the listing agent. However, as we get going in this unit, and especially when we get into Unit 8, we're going to see some different terminology. So it's important early that we understand this important terminology. The people working with the buyer are referred to as the buyer's agent and the buyer's firm. They can also be referred to as the selling agent or the selling firm. Those working with the buyer are selling the property to the buyer. Those working with the seller, referred to as the seller's agent and the seller's firm. There's also terminology for a listing agent and a listing firm. The confusion comes between the and the ing, seller and selling. Seller's agent versus selling agent. We will see this slide actually 2 more times by the time we're done. And again, we're going to start when we get into Unit 8. We look at our agency agreements. We look at the forms that we use to create these relationships. And that's where we're going to see the selling agent verbiage and the listing agent verbiage. Any questions or comments so far? Soft introduction. So earlier, we introduced you the idea of license law and commission rule. And I said the laws and the rules that I think you guys should take particular attention to, I'm going to introduce you to. So here we are at the beginning of agency. Commission Rule A.0104 is all about agency agreements and disclosure. I will show you in just a second. I have pulled this out of the website. I've made this as easy as I possibly can for you guys. I put it in our Campbell folder in the online learning system. I'm going to encourage you guys to read all the rules and the laws that we discuss. Some of you will, some of you will not. I think all of you should read A.0104, because this is the commission rule that regulates our agency agreements, our agency disclosures. Once you read it again. When you're done reading it again, guess what? Read it a third time. I will show you, if I make myself a note, where on the online learning system we can find commission rule A.0104. Again, I tried to pull it out to make it as easy for you guys as I possibly can. So in your book, we're starting on page 134. And the first thing we're going to talk about with 134 is the law of agency. The law of agency governs how we represent other people, particularly in a real estate transaction. The law of agency, as the name implies, is not one specific law. The law of agency is comprised of several different things. The law of agency includes the common law of agency. The common law of agency was derived from the early days of England, when the people served the king, how the king expected to be treated, how the people were supposed to serve the king. That's what started the idea of the common law of agency. Add to that throughout time by various court rulings. The court rulings are our contract law. People take people to court over an agency issue, for example. The gavel comes down. It adds to our contract law. This now regulates how we work with people in real estate transactions. And then, as we introduced you guys to, the law of agency also consists of license law and commission rule. License law and commission rule. So these four things together serve as the law of agency. And the law of agency regulates and help us dictate how we work with buyers and sellers. Let's do a little history lesson. Let's talk about how things used to be countrywide, across the entire country. Real estate has changed a lot over the years. And it used to be in real estate transactions, agents only ever represented the sellers. Buyers used to buy houses without any representation whatsoever. The agents always represented the sellers. To get a feel for what this looks like, have you ever been car shopping? Have you ever gone to a car dealership, walked out onto a lot? And let's say you walk out on the car dealership lot and, you know, the car salesman like just kind of appears out of nowhere. Hey folks, how you doing today? That car dealership or that car salesperson represents the car dealership of the lot that you walked into. Everybody with me? You walk into a Toyota lot, car salesman pops up. That car salesman is a representative of Toyota, of that dealership. So let's say you look at all the inventory, all the cars on the lot, you're the buyer, and you look at all the cars on the lot. What do you do if you don't find a car that you like? What do you do? Anybody want to share? If you don't find a car you like on this lot, what do you do?
Go somewhere else.
Yeah, I go to the next lot. Somebody says you leave. Yeah. If I don't like the product you have for sale, then I go somewhere else. And that's kind of how real estate used to be. Buyers would decide that they wanted to buy a house. So they would go to a real estate firm and the firm would show them their inventory. They would show them the product that they had for sale. And if you didn't have a product I liked, I'd just go on to the next real estate firm because buyers were not represented. And this is the way that real estate was for a while. It was all good and dandy until it wasn't. Your book, again, make a note on 135, talks about the Adena lawsuit. Please don't try to read this now. Make a note to read it after class. And in the Adena lawsuit, there was a buyer in Minnesota that at the end of the transaction felt like the agent was representing them because of the agent's actions, because of the way that the agent handled the situation. The buyer genuinely felt that the agent had their best interest in mind. But did they? Back in this day, did they? No, they represented the seller. Their job was to sell the house for the seller. So this buyer that felt that they were misrepresented sued the real estate firm. And y'all know how sometimes these lawsuits work, right? One person sues and then 50 other people stand up and say, oh yeah, me too. I felt like I was represented, but I wasn't. Y'all, this resulted in the real estate and a settlement for $19.9 million. $19.9 million to compensate those buyers that weren't represented, that felt that what they were. As a result of the Adena lawsuit, all states across this country started revisiting their idea of agency, their idea of what agency should look like. Do buyers need representation? And in the mid-90s, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission decided to adopt and start practicing buyer agency. Did y'all hear what I just said? In the mid-90s. That wasn't that long ago, was it? So we've been doing real estate the way that we have been as a result, partial result of this lawsuit, to help best protect buyers and sellers in the transaction, and to give the buyers the option to have representation. Give the buyers the option to hire an agent. Today, we still have states out there that don't practice buyer agency. Not everybody does. North Carolina does, and that's the state that we care about. So that's how we got to where we are today with buyer agency, seller agency. Also on page 136, we officially define caveat emptor. Caveat emptor is Latin for let the buyer beware. In North Carolina, the burden of discovery is on the buyer. It is the buyer's responsibility to learn as much about the home as they possibly can to decide if they want to buy the property or not. Again, we're going to talk more specifically about that, the buyer's opportunity to investigate, what that looks like, all those terms. That's what we'll see in Unit 10. So bear with me, it's coming. Contract to closing, contract law. So let the buyer beware. Caveat emptor says it is the responsibility of the buyer to learn everything they can about the property before they decide to buy. And in North Carolina, when the buyer hires an agent, we agree to take on that responsibility with them. Remember, I'm a fact finder. So if my buyer wants to investigate this or inspect that, my job as their agent is to say, okie doke, let's do it. I tend to operate by a pretty simple philosophy when I'm working with buyers. If it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. Never look at a buyer and say, oh, don't worry about lead in the home, it's fine. Just tell your kids not to lick the windowsill and they'll be okay. No, if your buyer has concerns or questions about lead in the home, as their agent, we're going to help them learn about it. We're going to help educate them. We're going to help them get the information. This is my job. Help provide the facts so they can make an informed decision. Y'all, I'm not the one buying this house. I have zero interest in this property. It's up to my buyer. The big word we have when we talk about agency is something called fiduciary. A fiduciary relationship is a relationship of trust. We're going to define principal in just a second. But what this fiduciary relationship says that I have a duty to my principal. I owe it to them to act out of their best interest. They should trust when they hire me to be their agent. They should trust that I have their best interest in mind. It's not about me and how much money I'm going to make in this transaction. Remember, we're not worrying about commission right now. We're worrying about the relationships that we're forming with the people so we can get paid. So fiduciary is a relationship of trust. And then on page 137, we need to define some words. Agency is the fiduciary relationship between the firm and the client. Agency is the fiduciary relationship between the firm and the client. Agency is the idea that one party represents another. When the client hires the firm and the firm allows me to work with that client, I'm representing them in their best interest. Principal and client are used interchangeably. Please write that down. Principal and client are one and the same. The client or the principal is the one that hires the firm. The client is the one that hires the firm. How the client hires the firm is through our agency agreements. We discuss our agency agreements in Unit 8. We're actually going to look at the forms that buyers and sellers use to hire our firms. Keep in mind, you guys, Unit 7 is focused on residential sales. So we talk about buyers and sellers. The client could also be, if you're a property manager and the owner hires you to manage their property, that owner becomes your client. You could also be hired by a tenant. So buyer, seller, owner, landlord, tenant. They use our agency agreements to hire the firm, thus to become a client. The agent is the person or the entity that's authorized to represent the client. Seller hires the firm, firm allows me to work with their seller. I can be the listing agent. Because the seller hires the firm, they're not just hiring one person. They're hiring everybody affiliated with that firm. One of you is allowed to be the listing agent. The rest of you are referred to as a sub-agent. You're an agent of an agent. We're going to talk more about sub-agency. You have this relationship by default. Let's see, there are 25 of you on the call. Let's pretend I'm the firm. When one of you gets a listing, you get to be the listing agent, and one of you gets to be the listing agent. The rest of you are sub-agents. By default, I can't let you harm my seller. I can't let you interfere with my seller's, hinder with my seller's efforts. We all owe the same duty to the seller because the seller hired all of us. We're going to talk more about sub-agency. I'm getting there. The customer in the transaction is also referred to as the third party. The customer did not hire the firm. Maybe the customer hires another firm. Maybe the customer chooses to go unrepresented. We're going to look at examples of client and customer. So what I'm pretty much telling you guys right now, you can take all consumers in your market and you can put them in two categories. They're either your client or your customer. If they enter into an agency agreement with you, they're your client. If they don't, they're your customer. How do we know in practice if you're my client or my customer? We need to look towards the firm. Did they or did they not hire the firm? A question comes in. So the firm is the one that put the agent to work with the buyer or the seller. Like, can they choose to work with a specific person? Absolutely. I'm the one out generating business, right? I'm hoping to get this seller, this listing for my firm. I'm out trying to find buyers, hoping to form this relationship for my firm. Could I get leads from my firm? Sure. Could a firm do it? Of course. Why? Because every firm's different. So I'm not here to tell you they all will or none of them will. Could the firm give you leads, give you buyers and sellers? Sure. For the most part, though, us as agents are running around trying to find buyers and sellers for our firm. So clients and customers, you either hire me or you don't. You hire me using an agency agreement. I'm getting there. Please give me 1 minute. It's on the next page. We also have a transactional broker, also known as a facilitator broker. These are referred to as non-agency relationships. With a transactional broker, the agent is only interested in the transaction. They're not interested in the best interest of their client. In North Carolina, everybody hear me? In North Carolina, state specific, transactional brokers are not allowed. In North Carolina, if an agent is involved in the transaction, at least one of the parties has to be represented. At least one of the parties had to hire a firm. A transactional broker, everybody's the customer. And in North Carolina, those are not allowed. So words, I would make flashcards of these words on page 137. We're going to embellish on them. I'm getting there, you guys, I promise. If it's testable, we'll get there. Some other verbiage I've already said that we're going to continue to hear. Parties are either represented or they're unrepresented. The one that is represented is the one that hires a firm. You're represented by the firm that you hired. Those that didn't hire the firm are unrepresented. Maybe they hire a different firm, but I don't care about the different firm. I care about my firm. Again, you can take all the consumers in your market and put them in two categories. They're either represented by your firm or they're not. How do you get to be represented by my firm? You enter into an agency agreement with me. So represented, unrepresented, we need to know who those people are. If you're represented, you're a client or principal. Unrepresented, you're a customer. Talking about the difference between the client and the customer. We work for the client. We work with the customer. It's the difference in walking side by side with a customer versus walking hand in hand with your client. Carrying your client's bag if they need help. Carrying them if they need help. We're going to talk about our different roles for each. I'm not going to pick my customer up. I'm not going to offer to carry my customer's bag. I'm side by side with them. I'm together with them in the transaction, but they're going to get a different level of service than what you do if you hire me. So we work for the client, following their orders, following their directions. We work with the customer, assisting them through the transaction. So my mentor, when she used to teach, she used to be a national trainer. And when she used to teach agency, she always used the visual, the image of an airplane. So I've borrowed this from her. She knows I use it, by the way. When we talk about client or customer, let's talk about first class versus coach. Let's pretend that you're the pilot of the plane and you're the one flying the plane. And we need to identify who goes in first class and who goes in coach. Our clients get first class treatment on the plane. Our customers are back in coach. Let me ask you guys some questions. No matter where you're sitting in a plane, whether you're sitting in the cockpit or way back in coach, aren't we all getting to the same place at the same time? Isn't it the pilot's responsibility to make sure that we safely get from point A to point B? So as the pilot of my plane, I'm responsible for all of you. I have a duty to get us through this transaction. My clients are going to get first class treatment. They're going to get like champagne and maybe a warm meal, hot towel. Customers don't get that, do they? Customers get like what? Lukewarm Coca-Colas and unsalted pretzels. What I'm telling you guys is the difference between client and customer is the level of service that they receive. Clients get first class. Customers get coach. Client, you become my client because you hire my firm. You hire the firm by using an agency agreement. So real quick, before we take break, because I made myself a note. If we look in the online learning system, again, all these folders on the left, we have one called Campbell. We have our own folder. And within Campbell, right here, is Commission Rule A.0104. This is the commission rule that regulates our agency agreements and disclosures. As we go through Unit 7 and 8, we're going to see reference to A.0104. It's in the Campbell folder in the online learning system. I think you should read it. It's only like 2.5 pages. I think you should read it. When you're done, I think you should read it again. And guess what? When you're done, what the heck, read it a third time. Somebody asked, what am I doing for the customer if they don't hire the firm? I'm getting there. We're going to talk about the duties. They're on the next few pages. The duties and responsibilities that we have for each. We're going to talk specifically about working with a client. We're going to talk specifically about working with the customer. Questions on where to find A.0104. Online Learning System, Campbell folder. Read it 6 times. I just threw a number out there. This isn't an easy read, you guys, so break it down into sections if you need to. Okay. Let's take our break. We come back. I got burning questions about clients and customers, so we continue when we come back. All right. Yeah, do we have a question? Maybe an accidental unmute. All right, cameras are on. I'm going to take attendance. So still in our conversation about clients versus customers, let's just take a pause and kind of recap. Thank you for telling me you're back. Take a pause and kind of recap where we are so far. Let's put this more in practical terms. So let's say, for example, you represent the seller. What does it mean if I represent the seller? What does that word represent mean? If you represent the seller. Thank you. I'm representing the seller. What does that mean? The seller is the principal. There you go. The seller hired the firm. I get to be the agent affiliated with a firm that works with the seller. Yeah. So if you represent the seller in this transaction, that means you do not represent the buyer. So if the seller hires us, the seller is my client, the buyer is the customer. The seller gets first class treatment, the buyer is back there in coach. What if my firm has been hired to represent the buyer only? Not the seller, just the buyer. Now what we're saying is the buyer's my client. The buyer gets to be in first class. The seller in the transaction is back in coach. So if we represent the buyer is our client, the seller's our customer. As we get into this unit, we will not get here today. But as we get into this unit, we're going to learn that we may have the opportunity in a transaction to represent both the buyer and the seller. That means the firm has two clients. The firm has two first class passengers. Nobody's a customer. If your firm represents both buyer and seller, that's something called dual agency. And I promise you, we're getting there. Probably will not see it today. As we mentioned earlier with the transactional broker, if your firm doesn't represent either seller or buyer, and both parties are your customer, again, it's about the firm. Another firm may represent one or the other or both. But in a transactional broker, you don't represent anybody. Both of them are your customer. And that's what's not allowed in North Carolina. If you are involved in the transaction, somebody has to be represented. Again, maybe they're represented by another firm. Somebody's got to be represented. This comes up, by the way, this transactional broker comes up quite a bit. Guys, here's the deal. The consumer doesn't know the parameters of my job. It's my responsibility to know the parameters of my job. It's my responsibility to know what I can and can't do. Could you have friends that say, we don't want to hire you, but we want you to help us through this transaction? Can you do that? Can they ask? Yeah, they don't know what they're asking. It's my responsibility to know that my answer is, I'm sorry, I can't. If you two need my assistance, then one of you needs to enter into an agency agreement with it. Is everybody with me? This comes up more than what we realize, and we need to understand how to answer. So the transactional broker, facilitator broker, and North Carolina is not allowed. So now what we're going to do, starting on page 138, is break down the different duties that I owe my client and my customer. And we're going to start with the client first because the client gets better treatment. Client's in first class and they get better treatment. And one way we can remember the duties that we owe our client is by remembering old car. And we're going to break all these down and talk about these. But old car is the sum. Old car helps us remember the duties that we have to our principal. Remember, the principal is also the client. So if I could take our question and twist it and ask it a different way. How do you, the consumer, get old car from me? How do you get old car from me? The consumer has to, I'm seeing it come in the chat. The consumer has to become my client. How do you become my client? You hire me. Only those people that hire the firm get old car. Remember the two categories that consumers go into? Either you're my client or you're my customer. So how do you get that first class ticket and get old car? You hire the firm. Old car is the duties that we owe our client under the law of agency. Law of agency, who's regulates. And if you guys are done writing, I need everybody to understand this right now. This real estate transaction is not about you. It's not about how much money you're going to make and when you're going to make it and how quickly you're going to get paid. The fiduciary relationship between the agent and the client is about the client. Trust me, you take care of the client and the money will follow. You take care of the client and you will get paid, and you'll get leads and you'll get referrals from that client. They'll tell their family and friends. You know, you take really good care of this client, they tell their family and friends, they tell their family and friends, and so on and so on. That's how we make lots of money in real estate. It all starts with taking good care of our client. And that's what Old Car says. My client comes first. This is why we don't talk about commission in this unit. We got to form these relationships. We have to understand what I owe them before I can ever worry about getting paid. Because if you never hired me, I'm not getting paid anyway. You guys with me? We're forming these relationships. I will get you paid. You take care of this one. I promise you the money will follow. It's about the client. And that's what the law of agency says. That's what Old Car tells us. So let's break down Old Car. What does Old Car mean? Well, I owe my client obedience. I am to act in good faith at all times, following my principal's lawful instructions. They are the boss. And when they tell me to do something, I say, okie doke. They are the boss. I can offer my opinion. I'm a fact finder. I'm going to help them gather information. Remember, I'm only advising, suggesting, helping them make an informed decision. And if I'm obedient, I'm following all their lawful instructions. They cannot make me break the law. And when we talk about breaking the law, we're referring to like police law, right? They can't make me go out and rob a bank or anything. I don't follow those instructions. But I'm also referring to license law and commission rule. They cannot make me violate license law and commission rule. So I'm obedient. The L in Old Car is loyalty. I'm going to put my principal's best interest above all others, sometimes including my own. We got to be sensitive to conflicts of interest. Anything that could hinder their ability or their effort to sell or buy. We're going to talk more about these conflicts of interest as we go. You can see there on page 139, it talks about self-dealing. I have to avoid, for example, self-dealing. We'll talk more about that. That all comes back to, I place my principal's interest above all others, including my own sometimes. The D in old car is disclosure. Once I learn about something related to this transaction that may influence my client's decision to buy or sell, I've got to disclose it. We disclose all material facts. We're going to talk about material facts. We'll probably even start on it today. Let's go ahead and wrap our brains around this right now. As a real estate agent, I always, do y'all hear my absolute word here? I always have a duty to disclose material facts. I don't care who you are. Are you my client? Are you my customer? Makes no difference to me. I always have a duty to disclose material facts. So we will see disclosure of material facts again when we talk about the customer. So with disclosure, what are we disclosing? What are we disclosing to our seller? What are we disclosing to our buyer? Well, it may depend on who our client is. So let's say our client is the seller. What are some things that I have to disclose to my seller client? Old car says I have to disclose all offers, every single one of them. Remember, I'm not the one making the decision. I'm not the one selling this house. I'm providing them the facts so they can make an informed decision. So as a listing agent, when you get the offer that's insultingly low and just going to make your seller mad, do I have to disclose it to them? Do I have to share that offer with them? You better believe I do. Because what offers do I disclose? All offers. Sometimes I had a seller a couple years ago, and he told me, I don't remember, I think I listed his house for like, let's say 185, I'm making numbers up, but I think I listed his house for 185. And he told me, he said, Julie, if I don't sell this house for 160, I can't afford to sell it. I cannot financially accept anything less than 160. And I said, I hear you. I did my research. I looked at the numbers. I think we can get you more than 160. We listed it for 185. He was pretty clear up front about the fact that he could not accept anything less than 160. We go on the market. I get an offer for like 155. What do you think I did? Immediate rejection. Shake your head no. Even though he told me, what duty do I have to disclose? What offers do I have to disclose to my sellers? All of them. It was a 30-second phone call. I said, hey, how you doing today? He said, I'm good. I said, great. We got an offer for 155 or whatever. I said, less than 160. He said, Julie, I can't do it. And I said, great. Have a good day. We'll talk to you later. It was that long. But guys, what if? Let's play the what if game, right? It had been a couple of days before I talked to this guy. What if something happened in his financial situation that he had to unburden himself from this house? He had to sell this house no matter what. He had to change. And he just hadn't gotten a chance to tell me yet. And then he later found out that I declined that offer for 155. Do I have a happy seller on my hand? Not even a little bit. So even if they have a conversation with you, then you tell them, be like, I hear what you're saying and I appreciate that. I have a duty to disclose all offers. So anything that comes in, I'm going to call you. I need to send it to you. We'll talk more about that. Remember, they can't make me, I have to follow their lawful instructions. And it's commission rule that says that we disclose all offers, no matter how good or bad they are. Everybody with me? When working with seller, if I find out that the buyer can close at a higher price than what they offered, the buyer can afford more than what they offered, I have a duty to tell my seller. When we get into financing, we're going to talk about pre-approval letters, for example. The pre-approval letter might say that the buyer's approved for a price higher than what they offered. Doesn't my seller deserve to know that? Maybe they want to counter, maybe they want to accept. I don't know what they're going to do. Again, I'm providing them all of the information. We get an offer and I'm going to say, these are your choices. What are those choices? We'll get there in units 9 and 10. 9 and 10 is all about contracts. So we're getting there. I also need to disclose to my seller the buyer's intention to sell for a profit. If I find out, doesn't matter how I find out, but if I find out that the buyer plans on purchasing the property and doing something to turn around and sell it for a profit, I've got to disclose that to my seller. I've got to keep my seller informed about everything throughout the transaction. Let's simplify it. As the listing agent in this scenario, I don't have any secrets from my seller. Anything about this transaction, that's why they hire me, is to share with them what I know, to share with them things that I learned. When we're working with buyers, we have to disclose any known deficiencies, defects about the property. Maybe the seller informed you something wasn't working. Maybe the listing agent did. Maybe your buyer finds it in a home inspection and they miss it. Just because they have a home inspection report in their hand doesn't mean they're going to read it. All of it. So we need to help our buyer by disclosing any known deficiency, any known defects about the property. Again, that takes us back to material facts that we are getting to. What do we know about material facts so far? I always have a duty to disclose material facts. I don't care who you are. You're my client, you're my customer. I'm also going to disclose to my buyer any information that may allow them to negotiate for a lower price. Maybe we find out why the seller is selling. Maybe we find out that the seller has to sell. For example, we may be able to get our buyers in at a lower price. All markets have something called a days on market. Days on market. That tells us how long the property's been advertised, how long has it been marketed. Average days on market fluctuates from market to market. Last year, the average days on market was like 2. This year, the average days on market, we're up to like, 10, 14, right? We're getting a little bit better. But if you're looking at a listing today and you know the average days on market, you know this because you're studying your market, you're the expert of your market, and you're in MLS, the multiple listing services, every day. And you know the average day on market is, 15 days. And your buyer's interested in a property that's been on the market for 45. Could that possibly tell us that that seller is more motivated than the one that just listed yesterday? Could that possibly tell us that we might be able to get our buyer a little lower price? Again, I'm in MLS at least once a day. I know what's going on in my market. I'm an expert of the market, and that helps my buyer. That can help me negotiate and get my buyer a lower price. Questions about OLD, obedience, loyalty, and disclosure. Okay. Let's talk about car. The C in car is confidentiality. Because of this fiduciary relationship, because of this relationship built around trust, my client needs to know that I'm not going to run around blabbing their confidential information about this transaction. Keep in mind, I don't care what you had for lunch today. We're only talking about things that are relevant to this transaction. So there's certain information that I cannot disclose without their permission. And I would take that a step further and say without your principal's written permission. Because what do we document? What do we document? Somebody unmute and tell me. What do we document?
Everything.
Everything.
Everything. Again, I had sellers a couple years ago. We weren't selling as fast as what they wanted to. They were getting a little frustrated. What do we do, Julie? What do we do? How do we sell? How do we sell? Okay. They wanted me to go into the multiple listing services and put in public remarks. Public remarks is for everybody to see. The property description, you might have seen on like Zillow, where it talks about the property. They wanted me to go in there and put super highly motivated seller. If I were to put super highly motivated seller, what does that tell the buyers? Bring me crap. Bring me the lowest offer you got, right? Isn't that what buyers hear? Okay, let's back up for a second. Aren't all sellers motivated? They have some reason to sell. They have some reason to put the sign in their front yard. The ones that advertise motivated sellers are the ones that the buyers know have another reason. So you guys with me? They're all motivated. But when they advertise that they're motivated, so I told my seller, I said, I'm not putting super highly motivated seller. I will put motivated seller. I don't want to give all our cards away. I will put motivated seller. And remember, this conversation was on the phone. So I said, once you send me an email giving me permission. And once I received that email and I had my principal's written permission, then I was able to disclose to the world that these guys were motivated. When it comes to confidentiality, this might bump on our moral compass just a bit, but when it comes to confidentiality, we need to tell our client everything that we know, everything that we learn about the customer. But guess what? I don't tell my customer anything about my client without their written permission. I tell my client everything about the customer. I tell my customer nothing about the client without their written permission. I'm getting questions about what's the difference in customer and client. The client gets confidentiality. The customer does not. How do we know something about the customer? Again, it doesn't matter how we learn about it. Maybe the other agent blabs. Maybe the customer shares something with you and then says, oh, I shouldn't have told you that. Don't tell your seller. Don't tell your buyer. It doesn't matter how we learn about it. What I'm telling you is once you learn something about your customer, you owe it to your client to share that with them, as long as it's about this transaction. If your customer tells you what color underwear they're wearing that day, I would probably refrain from telling my client. I might call the cops because that seems creepy, right? It's about this transaction. We tell our client everything about our customer, and that's what confidentiality says. That's what the C in old card gets. Once you hire me, you get this level of service. The A in old car is accounting. We account for our clients' funds. At some point in the transaction, you're probably going to have somebody else's money in your hand. You're going to act as the courier. You're going to deliver it from point A to point B. But the client needs to know that we're going to be able to account for their funds. We're going to maintain accurate records. We have a duty under accounting. We have a duty to make sure that our clients' numbers on the final closing statement are accurate. Making sure our buyers are bringing the right amount of money to closing. Making sure that our sellers are hopefully getting the right amount from closing. Closing disclosures, settlement statements, all in Unit 21. So we'll break down those numbers. We talk about things that are debits and credits to the buyer, things that are debits and credits to the seller, to help us make sure that their numbers are right. Now, I don't have this on my PowerPoint, but I want you guys to write something down real quick. There's a commission rule that says we keep all records, all documents, everything related to this transaction for at least 3 years. We'll define that rule. We'll see it. We're getting there. But you guys can impress me, because when we get to it, I can say, how long do we keep records? And everybody's going to say at least 3 years, meaning 3 is the minimum. Can you keep them longer than 3? Yeah, 3 is the minimum. Talking more about that. So we have a duty to account for everybody's funds, maintain accurate records, verify closing disclosure is accurate. The R in old car is reasonable skill, care, and diligence. With this, I always remember, just because you can doesn't always mean that you should. Can you jump on the highway this afternoon and drive 15 miles per hour over the speed limit? Can you? Sure. Is that going to make it okay when you get pulled over and the cop says, what are you doing? Why are you driving 15 over? And you're like, well, I mean, I hit my gas pedal and it just happened. So, I mean, I don't understand what the problem is because I can. Is the cop like that? Probably not. Just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And reasonable skill, care, and diligence tells us the things that we reasonably can do. Remember last week, we were talking about the fact that your license allows you to be involved in any transaction as long as the property was located in North Carolina. You may choose to work a certain county or a certain area. You can work the entire state of North Carolina. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says you should only consider working your market. Markets that you are familiar with, markets that you are in close proximity to so you can get to. I can drive to Wilmington to show a house, but should I? Am I willing to do the work? Is what it comes down to. Am I willing to drive to Wilmington every single time my buyer wants to see that house, wants to have their home inspector come in? I mean, that's a whole day just to drive down there and show one house and back. You guys with me? So can I? Well, sure, absolutely. My car will go to Wilmington and back today. Does that mean that I should? And that's what reasonable skill, care, and diligence. Again, we can take reasonable skill, care, and diligence and break it up to the difference in working with sellers and buyers. So with reasonable skill, care, and diligence when working with sellers, at some point in your listing appointment, the seller's going to look at you and say, so what should I list my house for? Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says that I need to respond with an educated response, not just blurt a number out there. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to pull some comps. I'm going to look at some numbers so I can give them a reasonable answer. We're going to talk about pulling comps and looking at those numbers. That's coming in Unit 17. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence to my seller. Again, anything I know about the buyer that could aid the seller in this decision. This kind of takes us back to disclosure, things that I disclose to my seller. Once I learn something about the buyer customer, advertising the property, how we're going to advertise and market the property. We're going to do open houses, for example, things that we reasonably should be able to do. And then helping our seller translate the terms of an offer. When we get into Unit 10, we're going to learn that our standard offer to purchase and contract is 16 pages. 16 pages for our contract. Please don't ask a seller to sit down and read all that, because you know what they're not going to? They're not going to do that. That's why they have us to help them understand the terms of the offer. We are the ones that are familiar with the contract, so we can assist our clients through the transaction. I'm telling you right now, for the most part, buyers and sellers don't read. They rely on us. You might find a reader. I'm not saying they're not out there. But for the most part, they're not sitting down reading the 16-page contract. They hired you. That's what our job is. Contract coming in Unit 10. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence when we're working with the buyer. Just like the seller wants to ask, how much should I list it for? The buyer's going to ask you, how much should I offer? They walk in the front door. They say, oh my God, this is my dream home. I would do anything for this home. Julie, what should I offer? Again, I'm not going to blurt a number out. I'm not going to say, oh, just offer the asking price. I'm sure the sellers are reasonable when they listed the home for sale. I'm going to do my research. I'm going to crunch some numbers. I'm going to look at some comps. I'm going to have an educated response. I'm going to help my buyer locate and view suitable properties. Again, when we get into Unit 8, we're also going to talk about working specifically with sellers. We'll talk about that listing appointment, for example. We're also going to talk specifically about working with buyers. One thing you may want to consider when you start working with a buyer is a buyer consultation, where we can sit down and I can ask you a lot of questions, so I know what kind of properties you want. Save both of us time if I ask some questions, wouldn't it? Instead of me just taking you out, showing you anything for sale. Well, this is a 6-bedroom, but I really only need a 2, right? It could save us a lot of time if I ask you some questions to help them locate and view suitable properties, things that fits their needs, making sure they can afford it, financing. One of the early questions you should have with your brand new buyer client is, have you talked to a lender? Don't take your buyer out there showing property until they've had a conversation with the lender. None of you know how much home they can afford until they've talked to a lender. So help them with financing, reasonable skill, care, and diligence. And guys, we're never going to look at a buyer and say, this is the lender you're going to use, and dang it, you're going to like it. I'm not the one getting this 30-year loan, am I? I'm not the one making this decision. The best thing we can do for our buyer is give them a list of 2 or 3 lenders, let them shop around, let them decide which lender they want to use. This is, in some cases, a 30-year commitment they're getting ready to make. That's a long time. Give them choices, give them options. Let them know they're making the best decision for themselves. And then reasonable skill, care, and diligence when we're working with the buyer. We're going to assist them in presenting their offer. We're going to help them write it. We're going to fill in the blanks. Ask them questions. How much do you want to offer? When do you want to close? What are the various fees and deposits you want to put down that we are talking about in Unit 10? Then once we help them fill in the contract, then we're going to present it on their behalf. And as the buyer's agent, when I'm presenting an offer on behalf of my buyer, This is the best daggum offer I've ever seen. Because you know what? This is what my buyer is willing to do. This is what my buyer wants to do. Y'all, as the listing agents, I have had buyer's agents call me and say, my buyer's offer isn't great. Do I even have to type it up? Can I just send you a text? They're telling me going into this, how is that representing your buyer? I mean, seriously, how is that representing? You didn't even take the effort to fill in the blanks for them. You don't know the seller situation. You don't know how low they're willing to go. Like I said, you present this offer like this is the best daggum offer you've ever seen, because this is what your client expects from you. Question comes in, is lender the same thing as getting pre-approved? Yes. So talking to the lender will get you pre-approved. It could get you pre-qualified. All that coming in 14 and 15. Thank you. By the way, if you do get an offer as a listing agent, if you do get an offer, maybe they send you a text and says, my guys are willing to offer these terms, and they spell it all out in a text, as opposed to using the contract that's provided to us. Do I have to present this text message to my seller? Do I have to present this offer? I would say yes, because what offers do we present? All of them. Now, I may advise my seller not to respond until we see it, until I see a signature, right? Until it's legit. But do I have to present oral offers? Do I have to present offers on text messages? Everybody, please shake your head yes. Because what offers do we present to our sellers? Oh, there's no exception to that rule. Still on reasonable skill, care, and diligence. We talked about what we may owe to the seller. We talked about what we may owe to the buyer. What's the reasonable skill, care, and diligence that we owe to both buyer and seller? Well, I need to be the expert of my market. I need to know what's going on with zoning, any proposed highways, NCDOT, restrictive covenants, and an HOA they're interested in. That's what reasonable skill, care, and diligence says. I have a duty to all my clients to practice this reasonable skill, care, and diligence. And if I don't know, let me do some research and find out. Let me do some investigation. Let me help point you in the right direction. I don't have all the answers. This is something else I know about real estate. No two transactions are ever the same. The transaction you closed yesterday is going to be absolutely nothing like the transaction you start today. No two transactions are the same. Consider this. Every single buyer, every single seller, and every single property are different. And those combination of the three make for a unique transaction every single time. I don't have all the answers. I may encounter something today I've never seen yet. My team leader's been at this for like 33 years. She's been doing this a long time. She still comes across things that she's not seen before because it's all different. It's all unique. And reasonable skill, care, and diligence says I'm never going to be the expert on everything because I haven't seen this in a transaction yet. And when it comes up for the first time, I'm going to find out. I'm going to get answers. I'm going to help you get solutions. I'm a fact finder for you to make an informed decision. So what if you're rolling your eyes, you're going reasonable skill, care, and diligence, whatever, Julie, what's the big deal? The real estate commission could find you guilty of negligence or misconduct. The courts could find you guilty of negligence or misconduct. The commission can't fine you. They're not going to sue you. The commission can only discipline your license. But guess what? Your buyer and seller client can hire an attorney and fine you and sue you. You might be liable to your principal for any damages. Again, that will come from the court. The court may rule that you lose your commission. You didn't practice reasonable skill, care, and diligence. You don't get to keep this money. Any violation, LL and CR, is license law and commission rule. And that's your disciplinary action from the Real Estate Commission. We're going to talk later in this unit about that disciplinary action, what they can do, what the commission can do if you violate license law and commission rule. License law and commission rule. We kind of introduced you guys on the first day, back when we were doing our welcome, our orientation. And we told you guys then that the Real Estate Commission, oh, I just lost my train of thought. Do y'all ever do that? What do we say the commission did? First day, what do we say the commission did? Uh-oh. License law, commission rule. Continuing education. They provide us, I'm back. They provide us with continuing education that we have to do each year. And one thing I've noticed in our CE is that a lot of these topics from pre-licensing pop back up in CE. So we recently, within the last year or two, we had a section in our continuing education about reasonable skill, care, and diligence, about making sure that we're doing the things that are best for our clients. Again, it's not about me. So I think a lot of these topics that we see in units 7, 8, 9, and 10, be prepared to see them throughout your career because they're going to keep popping up. The commission feels that we all need a reminder every once in a while, and I would agree with it. So let's look at an example together. Colin is a buyer's agent. He gets a request from his buyer to see a property that is 200 miles outside of the area that he normally works. Assuming the property is located within the state of North Carolina. Can Colin show his property? Shake your head, yes or not. Can he? Can he? Should he? Well, it depends. Is Colin willing to do the work? Is Colin willing to drive 200 miles? Like we said, every time this buyer wants to see this home, or the home inspector, the appraiser, anybody wants to show up. If Colin is willing to do the work, he's willing to educate himself in this market, he's willing to provide his buyer with the same information that he would had they been in his market, then Colin is more than willing to. I can't answer this question for you, but you guys need to start thinking about, if you get a buyer that wants to see something 200 miles away, are you willing to drive 200 miles one way every time to see the property? Or do you want to refer it to an agent in that area and collect a referral fee? Look at all those heads shake yes. Like, my gosh, Julie. Especially last year when gas prices were higher. These are questions I can't answer for you guys. But reasonable skill, care, and diligence makes you stop and ask yourself, just because I can, does that mean that I should? Here's another example for you guys about reasonable skill, care, and diligence. My expertise, my knowledge is in residential. I have very little, and by very little, I mean not much experience with commercial real estate. So let's say my friend calls me and my friend says, Julie, there's a commercial building that I want to buy or lease. Can you help me? Well, can I? I mean, my license says that I could. If I were willing to do the work and learn all about commercial and everything that my friend needs to have the information that she needs to purchase or lease this commercial building, I can. I may also choose to refer my friend to a commercial agent, somebody that practices and does this every day, and collect a referral fee. You guys with me? Again, you guys, buyers and sellers, the consumer, they don't know the parameters within my job. Just because they ask me to do something doesn't mean I'm going to jump out there and do it. That's my responsibility to know the parameters of my job and what those parameters are. What am I willing to do? Again, I could probably connect with a commercial agent, learn all about the commercial business, you know, the forms, the ins and outs of commercial. I could learn all that, but am I willing to do that work? It might depend on the price point, right? The sales price. Again, that's what we need to be stopping and asking ourselves. You can, but should you? And that's where we are with reasonable skill, care, and diligence. What questions do I have about car or old car? Old car are the duties that I owe my clients. Consider this too. Does Colin know a home inspector 200 miles away? Do they know a closing attorney 200 miles away that we can recommend? Have they had experience working with these guys, right? There's a lot to consider before you say, yeah, I'll drive 200 miles to show you this house. Because you got to stop and ask yourself, what if they fall in love and they want to move forward with this property? Now you're kind of stuck, aren't you? All right, so if our clients get old car, everybody good with that? Can I get a thumbs up? The clients get old car. I wish I saw everybody's thumbs up. Does that mean not everybody's here? Yeah, I guess that's what that means. Where do we go? Why do we leave the camera? It's only about agency, nothing important. All right, so if our client gets old car, the duties that we owe our customer are much simpler. What do I owe my customer? We owe our customers honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. I got to be honest with everybody in the transaction. I never have a reason to lie. Lying's not allowed. I got to be honest. I got to be fair. I got to treat everybody the same. I can't favor one customer over the other. And I owe everybody the disclosure of material facts. I don't care who you are. Are you my client? Are you my customer? I owe everybody the disclosure of material facts. We will start talking about material facts after lunch. I know we've or not after lunch. No, don't go to lunch, just break. Not what you can eat in 10 minutes. I think I'm getting hungry too. We owe everybody the disclosure of material facts. Are you my client? Are you my customer? Like I said, we've danced all around these material facts, so we're going to get there after the break. So the client gets old car. The customer gets honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. How do you get to be my client? Because you hire my firm. It's not just the listing agent that owes the client old car. It's all the agents in the firm. Because who does the client hire? The relationship is with the firm. With customers, I think one of the areas that can get not tricky, but a little bit more complicated is when we're advertising and marketing property. We need to make sure that the property that we're advertising, because that's going out to all customers all over the world, isn't it? So we need to make sure that the information that we're putting out there is as accurate as we know it to be. And one thing that comes up with advertising and marketing is a term called puffing. So puffing is, I don't know if you guys ever look at like Zillow or Realtor.com and you see the public remarks. The public remarks are like the description of the property. And we like to use a lot of adjectives and a lot of words to like paint a picture of the property, right? Yes, we provide pictures and we can provide a tour, but we also like to use words to describe the property. we need to make sure that when we're advertising a property, puffing is stating my opinion. Misrepresentation is a lie. And sometimes when we start using a whole bunch of adjectives to describe the property, that can be a very fine line. So make sure your advertisements and all your adjectives don't cross that fine line into misrepresentation. Puffing's okay, just be very, very careful. Puffing and misrepresentation, the difference is, if I tell you this is the best house on the block, that's my opinion. That's puffing. If I tell you it's the only house on the block, when in fact it's not, that's our misrepresentation. Just make sure your puffing is your opinion and it doesn't go so far that it crosses the line of a misrepresentation. Do you guys see this lot? This is our ocean right here. I want to be at the ocean. You guys see this vacant lot right here? Ocean front, we just need to build a house on it, right? Well, right now, these guys back here have a pretty good view, right? But what happens when somebody buys this lot and then builds a house? So when you're advertising this house back here, you need to be careful that you don't say like, you know, best ocean view on the island, because somebody could come in tomorrow and build a house and now you don't have the reason for your advertising. Now you don't have your ocean view. So I would say something like, you know, best front row home on the street or across the street from the ocean, right? I would not give any indication that that lot is going to stay vacant forever and ever and ever. And that's the difference in puffing and misrepresentation. Question comes in, if we're doing a referral, so you're referring somebody to that for that buyer 200 miles away, would the referral have to be made via the firm as well? Most firms, remember they're all different, but most firms have a policy that says you're going to run the referral through them. Are you going to get the whole amount or are you going to have to share it? That's up to the firm. They're all different, you guys. But yes, we're going to learn, we've got to be paid from our affiliated firm. Again, how much of that referral fee are you going to get? I don't know. It's up to the firm's policy. All right, before we go to break, I got a question for you guys. So I want you to set a private chat just to me. Private chat just to me. Everybody ready? Tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. Okay, so this one says, all the following are fiduciary obligations except. We hate these except questions, don't we? The reason this answer is going to be right is because it's wrong. With except questions, I'm looking for 3 trues and 1 false. Okay, so in a fiduciary relationship, if you are my client, shake your head yes or no. Do I owe you reasonable skill and care? I'm seeing trues. If you're my client in a fiduciary relationship, do I owe you disclosure of material facts? Yeah, why? Because we owe everybody disclosure of material facts. In a fiduciary relationship, and am I owed commission? Am I going to get obligation of commission? Did commission fall into old car? Again, you guys, I'll get you paid as long as you do the job. If you don't do the job, there is no commission. We've got to put these clients first. And fiduciary, do we have loyalty? Remember old car, the one we did not see was that compensation. Will you get paid? Of course you will. But I'm telling you guys, if you go into this industry with dollar signs in your eyes, and that's all you're led by, you're not going to make it far. This is a people industry. If you want to make lots and lots and lots of money, you take care of the people and the money will follow. My team leader that's been at it for 33 years, she doesn't have to do open houses anymore. She doesn't have to be out there prospecting. All the business she has today is from referrals from past clients, people that have had a good experience with her and have told their family and friends, call my agent, use her. You guys with me? If you treat the people right, if you give the people old car, the money will follow, I promise. Do not come into this led by dollar signs asking, how much money can I make this year? And if you are, I mean, that's fine. I can't stop you. But remember, don't put your cart in front of your horse. Before you start making a whole bunch of money in real estate, you got to get your license first. Everybody with me? Are we good? Enough? Okay. So let's take our last break. We come back, we're going to get into this wonderful world of material facts. Are we back? All right. So let's take our attendance. Welcome back. Okay. So now we need to talk about material facts. So my book people, I'm on page 142. I guess you can ignore that 161. Sorry about that. But we're back in the book on page 142, starting to introduce ourselves to things that are and are not material facts. Because we need to understand what is and is not a material fact, and understand that we always have a duty to disclose what the commission identifies as material facts. So before we get into specifics, let's talk about the big picture. The big picture says a material fact is something that a prudent person would consider important when making a decision. Well, that's about as subjective as it gets, isn't it? Because I'm a prudent person and I may consider something relevant in this transaction. You also are a prudent person and you may consider something else relevant. So individually speaking, between me and you, what one of us may consider a material fact, the other one may not. So the commission took this broad definition, very broad definition of material facts, and they broke it down into specifics to make sure that we are all on the same page. So we're at the top of page 143. If you don't want to write down all the words, we're at the top of page 143. The commission has determined that material facts are facts about the property itself. Are there structural issues? Does the roof leak? Do we have high radon? Is there mold? Any fact about the property itself falls in the category of material facts. Material facts can also be a fact relating directly to the property. It somehow affects the value. It's not about the property, but it's close enough proximity or directly to the property that it affects the value. Think pending zoning changes. If this area was rezoned, couldn't that affect the value? What about a planned highway construction? The highway may not directly affect the property, but it might be close enough that it affects the value. Material facts are those relating directly to the ability of your principal to complete the transaction. And I'm not going to lie to you guys. This third one is the one that takes us, it's the hardest for us to wrap our brains around. And let's talk about why. Didn't we just babble on and on and on about confidentiality, and I keep all my clients' secrets and I'm not going to run around blabbing their confidential information to everybody on the street? And that's one thing that my client can rely on when they hire me. This is the exception to the confidentiality. If I find out that my client can't complete the transaction, I have a duty to disclose that. And generally speaking, anything that affects the ability of your principal to complete the transaction usually revolves around money. If, for example, you find out your buyer can't get loan approval, that affects their ability to complete the transaction. Is that important to the seller? Is that something the seller would need to know? Well, sure. Because if the buyer can't buy, then the seller's got to find another buyer. They got to go through this process again. What if your seller, while we're under contract, is facing foreclosure or bankruptcy? And that affects their ability to sell. Isn't that important to the buyer? So the confidentiality is all good. It's all true. But if it directly affects the ability of your principal to complete the transaction, I've got to disclose it. That's not a secret we can keep because it involves the other party. Does that make sense? It directly affects or impacts the other party. And that's why we need to share it. Remember that loyalty or obedience, says, I follow my client's lawful instructions. So we go under contract, your buyer's denied loan approval, and they say, wow, this is embarrassing. Please don't tell anybody. Is that a lawful instruction I can follow? No, it's a material fact that I have to disclose. The fourth one is kind of down here by itself. I want to separate it on purpose. The first three material facts are those that we disclose to our clients and customers. This fourth one is a material fact for me. This fourth one takes us back to, if it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. If it's important to my seller, then guess what? It's important to me. It's not a material fact that I'm going to run around blab to everybody, disclose to everybody. This is a material fact for me. Guys, once we learn of anything that's important, you have a buyer that wants to buy and be able to convert their garage into a hair salon. Don't I now have, as their agent, a material fact on my hands? Don't I have a duty to check zoning and check the restrictive covenants and make sure that the property they buy, they can convert their garage into a hair salon? But what if the buyer never shares that with me? What if they know this is why they're buying this house, this is their intentions, and this is what they're going to do, but they never think it's important to tell me? Can I help them if I don't know? Unfortunately, no. We can't assume all buyers want to convert their garage into a hair salon, right? This is why we have to ask questions. This is why when you join your firms, it'll probably be recommended that you do a buyer consultation. You sit down, you ask questions, you help buyers get to what they need. I had buyers once. She told me very early in our relationship, that she has a dining room set that is large. She said her dining room table is always set for service of 10, 4 on each side, 2 at the end. She has a credenza and a china cabinet. She's not taking the leaf out of her table. She's not getting new dining room furniture. She's going to find a house with a dining room big enough to fit her furniture. Did I have a material fact on my hand? Did she share something that was important to her? Absolutely. Does it make difference if it matters to me or not? No. If it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. There were homes we didn't go see because I was able to look at the dimensions of the dining room in the multiple listing service and say, this room isn't big enough. Does that kind of make sense? That's a material fact for me. And guys, when you're working with buyers and sellers, we got to ask the questions, but more importantly, we have got to listen. Listen, take notes, make sure you're getting, especially when you start working with multiple buyers. You could be working with 5 buyers, all with 5 different needs. It's my job to keep those sorted. It's my job to know that this is what this buyer needs, and this buyer needs a dining room, and this buyer wants to convert the garage into a hair salon. You guys with me? When it comes to material facts, I'm going to say this again. I'll probably say this 50 more times before we're done. I always have a duty to disclose material facts. If you're working with a client, if you're working with a customer, we always have a duty to disclose these material facts. Please keep in mind, I can only disclose what I know. We may have issues with the home that are referred to as latent defects. And I spelled that out for you because I know sometimes my accent isn't easy to understand. So we may have things in the home known as latent defects. Latent defects are hidden. They're not obvious. If you can't discover these material facts by asking questions or looking, smelling, touching. I mean, if you walk into a room and you smell mildew, your little red flag should go up. Yes, we need to ask some questions. If you can smell it, guess what? So can the potential buyer. But if the mold is behind this wall and you can't smell it, you can't see it, the only way I know for sure if there's mold behind this wall or not is to whip out my crowbar and knock this wall down and see. And guess what? We're not about damaging the property. My job is not to go in and tear the house apart looking for latent defects. So anything that we can't, is not obvious, something that's hidden, it's not a material fact yet. Once it becomes obvious, then it becomes a material fact that we have to disclose. Look with me, if you will, in your book on page 143. In 143, the first full paragraph there under our 4 material fact bullet points talks about some issues that are declared to be a material fact by the commission. Like, you don't have to stop and ask yourself, is this a material fact that I have to disclose? And the commission has already addressed that, yes, what we're looking at on page 143 are material facts that have to be disclosed no matter what. First off, you have ephes, also known as synthetic stucco. Ephes is an exterior siding. It kind of looks like concrete. I tend to associate ephes or synthetic or stucco siding with like Spanish style homes. They look rough, look like if you touch them, it's going to feel like the sidewalk. You guys know what I'm talking about? That's an exterior siding known as stucco. If it's ephes or synthetic, synthetic means that it's fake. So it's not real concrete. It was clad with a inferior product. And some of the problem with that is that moisture gets behind that surface, and moisture on wood in the home is not good. So in time, it can cause mold. We might invite termites, right? There's a lot of things that could go on. So if we learn that the home was ever clad in synthetic stucco, even if it's been treated, even if it's been repaired, that will always remain a material fact on the property. Again, I get questions. How do we know? How do we know? We got to ask questions. When you see the seller for the first time and you go to the listing and you see this concrete Spanish style home, your little red flag should go up to ask questions. Did you ever have problems with this? What kind of stucco? Is it synthetic? Is it real? I've always heard too, if you want to know if stucco is real or not, again, it's like concrete. So when you walk outside after class, if you like knock on your driveway or your sidewalk, have you ever knocked on concrete? It sounds solid, right? If you knock on synthetic stucco, it's hollow. And that's not how your driveway sounds. That's not how your sidewalk sounds. We've got to ask the questions. If the residence has ever had leaking polybutylene pipes are, let's call them what they are. They're a cheap pipe. And builders were passing those off for years and years and years. And it's one of those things, they're not a problem until it's a problem, and now it's a problem. Once they've leaked, even if they've been repaired, if they've ever previously leaked, they will always remain a material fact. Please keep in mind, they're not considered a material fact though, until they've leaked. If they've never leaked, or they haven't leaked yet, it's not a material fact. And then the last thing you have there is meth houses. If you ever find out that the property was once served as a meth home, Sometimes you can smell it. Sometimes we can ask serious questions to find out. But if we ever learn that it was once a meth home, we have to disclose that. The gases and cooking meth soak in, they get everywhere. Ceilings, floors, walls, everything. So the new owner needs to know that it was once served as a meth lab. Again, if it was once a meth lab and it's been fixed and treated and you walk in the door and you can't smell anything, you have no reason, I would not look at a cellar and say, yeah, did y'all ever cook meth in this kitchen? But I'm always paying attention to my little red flag. And if you walk in and smell a smell you're not sure of, your little red flag should go up and prompt you to ask questions. What's that smell? Everybody with me? So let's talk about kind of in practice. Let's just kind of first focus on the cellar, because this is the big conflict here. Let's back up for just a second when we're working with the seller. Remember what we said about caveat emptor? Caveat emptor says, let the buyer beware, which means the onus to learn about the property is on the buyer. The seller has no obligation to disclose anything. They don't have to disclose facts about the property. They don't have to disclose facts directly to the property. They don't have to disclose anything. Only the seller can hide behind caveat emptor. The real estate agent always has a duty to disclose material facts. Do we see a conflict and an interest here? Seller saying, I have major structural issues. Shh, don't tell anybody. Me as the agent, remember, I follow their lawful instructions. Does license law and commission rule allow me to hide the fact that we have structural issues in this home? Shake your head, yes or no. Does license law and commission rule say you can hide this fact about structural issues? And I'm seeing a few heads. I wish I saw more. Shake no. Because license law and commission rule says I always have a duty to disclose material facts. Y'all tired of me saying that yet? Don't be. You're going to hear it a lot more. So the seller says we have structural issues. The agent says, oh, that's nice, I have to disclose it. Do we see a major disconnect? Do we see a major tribulation here between the seller and the buyer, or the seller and the agent? And the answer is, of course. So what do? How do we prevent this? Guys, it's all about having the conversation up front. Let your seller know before you even tour the home, before you even see the home. I have to disclose all material facts. You don't, seller, but I do. They need to understand this going into it. And don't wait for them to tell you something and then you look at them and say, oh yeah, I got to tell everybody. Have these conversations up front before you discover something, before you find that structural defect, or before the seller tells you. So now the seller knows what they know. The seller knows that you have this duty to disclose material facts. And they might be thinking to themselves, well, then I'm not going to tell my agent about the structural issue. I'm going to keep that information to myself. That's the seller's right under caveat emptor. The seller doesn't have to disclose to anyone, me and you included. If we're in the basement and we see a huge crack in the wall, shouldn't I have a little red flag that goes up to prompt me to ask some questions? That's what we're looking for. So when we get into material facts, particularly with a client, we're going to start using the verbiage of this duty to discover and disclose. I'm not going to hide my head in the sand and wait for these material facts to magically manifest themselves. I have a duty when I see a major crack in the foundation to have my little flag go up and ask questions. Understanding I'm not a structural engineer, I'm not a general contractor. I cannot look at a crack and say, oh yeah, you got major structural issues. But what I can do is this duty to discover. My little red flag goes up. Gee, that's a big crack. Have you had that looked at? Because you know what a good buyer is going to do, or a good buyer's agent is going to do? they're gonna recommend that that gets looked at. Everybody with me? So the seller doesn't, and I think this is a big problem topic with material facts. The agent and the seller have two separate roles. The seller can hide behind caveat emptor. They don't have to disclose anything. However, once the agent finds out, I don't care how you find out. Once the agent finds out, we now have a duty to disclose. We always disclose material facts. Remember earlier when we first started class today and we were talking about this radon? Let's walk through a scenario. I think we know enough to know to walk through the scenario. So you are the listing agent. You have the house listed for sale. Buyer comes in, makes an offer, seller accepts, we go under contract. More on that, units not attached. But for simplicity, we're under contract. The buyer starts their investigations and their inspections, and they do their radon test. And the radon comes in at, I don't know, 8 picocuries. Shake your head, yes or no. Is 8 picocuries a concern? Is it something to worry about? Yeah, because we said anything more than 4.0 picocuries is a concern. So 8 is like double that. It's a concern. The buyer asks the seller to put in a radon mitigation system. The buyer asks, shake your head, yes or no. Does the seller have to put in a radon mitigation system? Are they required to? Our answer is no, because the seller doesn't have to do any repairs. They have that choice. The buyer can ask, the seller chooses how they answer. So let's say 8.0 picocuries, the buyer asks, and the seller says, nope, I'm not going to do that. That's their right. We can't get upset with them for not doing it. That's their right. They're exercising their rights. Because of that, let's say that the buyer chooses to terminate. They have a window in which they can terminate the contract. Unit 10, we're talking about. They choose to terminate within their window because the seller's not willing to do a mitigation system. Once the listing agent finds out that the radon is 8.0 picocuries, we go back on the market. Doesn't the listing agent now have a material fact on their hand that they have to disclose to the next? Because you know what, guys, this is what I know about radon. It's not going to go away on its own. The next buyer is going to deal with it. The buyer after that, the buyer, you guys with me? So once we found out, once that buyer says, I'm terminating because the radon level is more than 4.0 picocuries and your seller's not willing to do a mitigation system, I now have a material fact on my hand that I have to disclose when I put it on the market. How do I disclose it? I mean, you can put it in public remarks if you want to. When the next buyer calls and schedules a showing, you can say, by the way, we had a test from the former contract and the radon level was 8.0 picocurie, right? I mean, how does it disclose? There's no rule that says how we get that information out there. When you guys get into multiple listing services, MLS, again, we're going to define that in Unit 8. But once we get into the MLS, we're going to see that we have a field, it's called agent only remarks, which is information that we can share with all members of the Triad MLS, and it doesn't go out to the public sites. So you're never going to see agent only remarks in Zillow, for example. The consumer can't see those. That's a great place to disclose. Again, there's no rule that says how we put the information out. You could pick up the phone, you can send an email, you can send a text. My duty is to disclose. There's no rule how. So throughout the transaction, you may list the property today knowing that there's a big crack, that there's structural issues. Maybe the seller told you that. But as you go through the transaction, you may learn things. We always have a duty to disclose material facts. Client and customer. Everybody gets the disclosure material facts. So let's talk about material facts as it relates to the buyer. The listing agent should disclose what they know to the buyer's agent. The listing agent should be telling the buyer's agent structural defects, radons more than 4.0 picocuries. If it's latent, if it's something that the listing agent couldn't have discovered, again, the buyer hires the agent to help them get through these inspections and investigations. So one of the best ways we can help our buyers disclose material facts is by encouraging them to do home inspection, pest inspection, radon, have a survey done, all these various things to help them learn as much about the properties they possibly can. That's why they have us, to help them learn. Again, they have this window of time, this period to terminate if they want to. Help them learn what they can within that window of time so they can make an informed decision. The buyer gets to decide after their investigations, now knowing what I know, do I want to move forward with, or do I want to terminate this transaction? Again, more on that coming in Unit 10. Please bear with me. So let's look at an example together. Sarah's a listing agent. She's performing a listing presentation with Mark. During Sarah's walkthrough on the property, she notices a stain on the ceiling. Stop. Should Sarah's little red flag goes up? There's a stain on the ceiling. It didn't get there because it's dry. It got there because either the roof leaks or there's a bathroom right above us or some source of water above us that's flooding. Everybody with me? So a stain on the ceiling, your little red flag should go up to prompt you to ask some more questions. So what does Sarah do? She asks Mark about the stain. Now, this is assuming Sarah's had this conversation. I should have said that first. Sarah's had the conversation with Mark already that she has to disclose. Mark goes on to say that the roof is leaked. It's been repaired 3 times, but ultimately needs to be replaced. Then Mark goes on to say that the roof is so bad, that's one of the reasons why he wants to sell. And then what does Mark do? Mark looks at Sarah and says, shh, don't tell any buyers. I'll repaint the ceiling. Buyers will never see that stain on the ceiling. They don't have to know. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Once you learn about it, you can't unlearn about it. Mark has every right in the whole wide world to paint over that stain and not tell anybody about it. Caveat emptor. Sarah, on the other hand, follows license law and commission rule. And now that she knows that there's a roof leak, she's got this duty to disclose to potential buyers. Obedience says we follow our clients' lawful instructions. And one of the best ways we can combat this is to have these conversations with our potential buyers and sellers up front. Make sure they know my duties and obligations going into this transaction. Do not blindside them. Do you like to be blindsided? Yeah, I didn't think so. What questions do I have so far on material facts, things that are material facts? I mean, bottom line, Mark's the one that went wrong in this, right? Mark should have repainted that stain before Sarah ever showed up. Then she has no reason for that little red flag to go up. Sarah didn't do anything wrong. I blame Mark. But what if Mark can't paint? What if he doesn't do a good job? And there's still signs of that stain when Sarah shows up. Little red flag goes up and prompts you to ask some questions. We cannot be afraid to ask the hard questions or the easy ones.
So what if the material fact is corrected?
That's a great question, Katrina. Thank you. Then I have nothing to disclose, right? So Mark repairs the roof. We're all good. If it's fixed, if it's corrected, that material fact goes away. When we get into Unit 8, we're going to introduce you guys to a seller disclosure. This is a weird form. It's a mandatory form, which means the seller must complete it. But the mandatory form allows for optional disclosure. The seller has the right to answer no representation, which means they're not telling you if the roof leaks or not. I'm not saying one way or another. No representation. It's a mandatory form. They have to provide it. But caveat emptor says they have optional disclosure. Regardless of how the seller completes that disclosure, we always have a duty to disclose material facts. We'll see that form when we get into Unit 8. So what happens if you mishandle material facts? Let's see. If Mark is the client, we have to disclose the material fact to the buyer? Yes, because license law and commission rule says I always have a duty to disclose material facts. I don't care who you are, if you're my client or you are my customer. So even though Mark hired my firm, even though I represent Mark in all his best interests, we always have a duty to disclose, and that includes the buyer customer. Guys, please remember, only the seller can hide behind caveat emptor. Only the seller can say, I choose whether or not to disclose this or not. Once you are licensed, we follow license law and commission rule. Question comes in, do I tell the buyer or their agent? Sure. I mean, if they have an agent, I'll communicate directly with the agent. If they don't have an agent, then I'm communicating directly with them. But yeah, most agents, I want to talk to you. I don't want you talking to my client. So most of the times the agents communicate amongst each other on behalf of our clients. But not all buyers have to be represented. You may have a buyer without an agent, in which case you're communicating directly with them. Same thing with the sellers. Not all sellers are represented. So if you're the buyer's agent, you may be communicating directly with the seller. Have you guys ever heard of a for sale by owner? Or in this industry, we like to call them FSBOs. For sale by owners didn't hire a firm, did they? For sale by owners are going it all alone. They're going unrepresented. In which case the buyer's agent is communicating directly with them. Do I prefer buyers or sellers? Y'all, I'm hungry. I work with anybody. It makes no difference to me. Whatever the business is. To your point, you may choose at some point in your career to work with only buyers or only sellers. This is your business. You guys are going to be independent contractors. As an independent contractor, who do you work for? You are your boss. If you don't like your boss, you got problems. You affiliate with a firm. They don't employ you. You affiliate with a firm. Again, hang on. We're going to talk about that as we get further into unit. I think that's one of the last things in Unit 7 we talk about is that independent contractor and what that means. It depends on the market too, doesn't it? The last 2 years, we all wanted sellers because you know what? Houses sell themselves. You didn't have to do anything. That pendulum swinging back. So yeah, I'll work with anybody. Makes no difference to me. I like stuff like food, power, internet, roof over my head, you know. Okay. All right, so back to us as the agents and our duties and responsibilities of material facts. What if we don't properly disclose a material fact? What if, worse yet, we lie about a material fact? We're getting into this prohibited conduct at the bottom, near the bottom of page 143. But before we do that, I want to go off book for just a second. And I want to define some words. So we're just going to define some words and then we're going to do a mashup. So let's just first define some words. We're going to see some words like misrepresentation and omission. A misrepresentation is communicating false information. A misrepresentation is a lie. You opened your mouth and a lie fell out. Maybe you opened your mouth. Maybe you sent it in a text or an email or your MLS advertising, your marketing advertising. If you misrepresent a material fact, somehow you got the wrong information out there. Compare a misrepresentation to an omission. If you omit a material fact, you kept your mouth shut. You didn't disclose. So as we're going to see in just a second, prohibited conducts with material facts, if we lie about them, that's a prohibited conduct. If we omit them, if we don't share them, it's a prohibited conduct. Then we're going to take these actions down and we're going to talk about whether or not it was done intentionally or unintentionally. A willful act is done on purpose. You lie and you knew you lied. You omitted and you knew you omitted. You did it intentionally. You did it deliberately. A negligent act is done unintentionally. You did it without knowledge, but guess what? It still happened. So let me ask you guys in a private chat. Tell me in a private chat, just what we know so far. Which one do you think is the worst offense? A willful act or a negligent? You can say W or N. I know what you're speaking of. Which one do you think is the worst offense? One that you do on purpose or one that you do accidentally? And I would agree, Joe, I hear what you're saying. I got an answer to that. I absolutely hear what you're saying. But I would agree that for the most part, an act done on purpose, an act done willfully is going to be more of a violation than one done accidentally. Did the negligence still happen? Sure. And we're going to talk about how the commission handles that negligent act, because you're not off the hook. You're not going to be able to look at the commission and say, well, I didn't know. You're not off the hook. So is a negligent act punishable? The answer to that is it depends. And if I don't get there today, then we'll get there on Thursday. So I'm getting there. That's like my second favorite thing to say in this class, right? We're getting there. I feel like we're on a car ride. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Guys, we're getting there. My grandma used to say, every turn of the wheel gets us closer and closer. Our wheels are turning. All right, so we defined misrepresentation, we defined omission, we defined willful, and we defined negligent. So now on page 143, let's do a mashup. When it comes to mishandling material facts, the commission has identified the prohibited conduct, either a willful misrepresentation, a negligent misrepresentation, a willful omission, or a negligent omission. We're going to talk about each of these next. I won't get through all of these today. So however far we get today is where we'll pick up on Thursday. So let's start first with talking about a willful misrepresentation. You know information. You know. I don't care how you know. Somehow you know. You know information about a material fact. And when asked, you say, the roof is fine. The structure is fine. There's no radon issues. Willful misrepresentation says you know and you lie. You have actual knowledge. Let's say, for example, you know that the crawl space or the basement in this home that you're getting ready to list, you're getting ready to list this home for sale. And you know that the basement floods when we have a good heavy rain. How do you know this? Maybe the seller told you. Maybe you stepped off the stairs in the basement and stepped in 3 inches of water. Does your little red flag go up? I hope so. Ask questions. Why don't you look before you step, right? So you don't do that to begin with. Somehow you know that the basement floods. A buyer becomes interested in the property. A buyer becomes interested in the property. Let me finish, please. A buyer becomes interested in the property and they ask you, are there any problems when it rains? And you say, all good. Maybe it's sunny and we haven't seen rain in 2 weeks. Do we go through periods of drought where we don't see rain? Maybe we haven't seen rain in 2 or 3 weeks. Buyer asks and you say, no, no flooding. Is that a lie that you did on purpose? Yo, you knew it flooded. You stepped in the water, remember? Just because it's not there at the moment, once you know it floods, you guys with me again? What if we're having like a drought this summer? We haven't seen rain in months. Once you know, you know. That would be a willful misrepresentation. You know, and you lie. Let's go back to our radon buyer. Buyer terminates. Go back on the market. Next buyer comes along and says, do you know if the sellers have ever had any radon problems, radon issues? And you go, nope, ship shape, all good. Did you know there was a radon issue? Did you lie about it? Willful misrepresentation. Let's look at an example together. Seller's agent is aware. Let's key word here. Ask yourself first, do they know? Seller's agent is aware. Do you know if you're aware of something? Yeah. That the present owners of the listed property have had serious problems with electrical wiring. Nevertheless, the broker tells the prospective purchaser that all mechanic systems are in excellent condition. That broker will probably be found guilty of willful misrepresentation. They knew, they lied, they opened their mouth and a lie fell out. Again, maybe it was verbal, maybe it was through an email, maybe it was in your marketing, your advertising. So willful misrepresentation. Then you have negligent misrepresentation. It's still a lie, but maybe the agent doesn't know. Maybe they've received incorrect information. Or maybe it's just a mistake. Do you guys ever make mistakes? My hand just went up first. By golly, I'm a human. I can keep a tally mark of how many mistakes I make a day. Anybody else with me? Guess what? We all do, you guys, right? Guess what else? Our real estate commissioners, they too are human. They too make mistakes. They understand that sometimes we make mistakes. Negligent misrepresentation. The licensee accidentally, unintentionally puts out false information. You didn't mean to, but it still happened. So before we look at and talk about our examples, when it comes to any negligent act, negligent act, misrepresentation or omission. When it comes to any negligent act, the Real Estate Commission is going to perform what's known as the reasonable standards test. The reasonable standards test asks, would a reasonably pertinent broker have known this information or could have found out? In other words, did your little red flag go up? Did you have reason to ask questions? Did you have reason to investigate? That's what the commission is going to look at with negligent acts. Could you have found out? If it's latent and it's not obvious, I mean, I probably couldn't have known. If I step in 3 inches of water off the stairs and I choose to pretend it didn't happen, I shake my foot and I choose to pretend that it didn't happen, it's going to fail the reasonable standards test, because the commission's going to say, why didn't you ask questions? Why didn't you get to the bottom of where that water is? This kind of making sense? We got to always look for those red flags. So let's go back to our water in the basement scenario. You list the home, you see the home in the middle of the dry spell. You never step in the water. You never see the basement flood. You go through the home with the seller, you walk into a perfectly dry basement, you have no reason for any red flags to go up. Maybe you say, do you ever have any problems with flooding down here? Maybe you ask, but if you don't have any red flags, how do you know to ask? You guys with me? I have no way of knowing. Seller doesn't tell me, we haven't seen rain in 6 weeks. Buyer comes in, says, is there any problem with flooding? I say no. I still lied, but it's negligent. And that's where we have the reasonable standards test. The next rain, maybe now I know, and I can go back and correct. Please understand, when you make a mistake, and you will, when you make a mistake, go back and make it right. Don't ignore it and pretend that it didn't happen. If you have a seriously interested buyer and then you find out something different than you told them, let them or their agent know. Go back and make it right. So the reasonable standards test. Here's another example, negligent misrepresentation. When viewing a property as subdivision, the buyer tells their agent they want to build a large storage building in the backyard and asks if it would be permissible. Buyer's agent calls the listing agent and is told, well, everybody else in the subdivision has a storage building, so I don't see what the problem is. Nobody checked the covenants. Guess what? Both could go down for negligent information. Could we have found out the answer if we checked the covenants? Just because you see a storage shed or a fence doesn't mean it's okay, right? So when they specifically say, can I have a storage shed? That's a great question. Let me get back to you guys. I'm telling you right now, let me get back to you is a perfectly acceptable answer. Please don't feel you need to just make up something to answer that question. I don't know. Let me get back to you is a perfectly acceptable answer, as long as you plan on getting back to them. If you never have any intentions of getting back to them, then just say, I don't know, and stop talking. Sometimes less is best. I want you guys to look in your books real quick, page 144, over to the top of page 145. In addition to talking about willful misrepresentation and negligent misrepresentation, you guys will also notice on 144 and 145 that there's examples. I like the examples. I think the examples help. So break these down. Willful misrepresentation, what does that mean? Here are some examples. Negligent misrepresentation, what does that mean? Here are some examples to help you guys better understand this. Guys, it may not seem like it, but we've covered a lot today. It's a lot with agency already. We continue on agency on Thursday. We'll keep going next week. Please make sure you're going back and reviewing what we've covered today. Please look ahead so you know what's coming next class. This is what I know about agency. There's not a single one of you that's leaving this call today as an agency expert. Agency is one of those things that you got to revisit over and over and over again. It's not a one and done. It's not a, oh, I heard the term client, I'm good. It's one of those things that you got to revisit over and over and over again. Pre-licensing, we're not introducing you to everything that we know about agency. We're scratching surfaces. You're going to learn a lot more about agency when you come see me in post-licensing, and particularly when you get out there and start actually working with buyers and sellers, training with your firm, that kind of thing. So I say that because I know agency can get frustrating. And some of you may be ready to like pull your hair out or whatever, but please don't do that yet. We're not there yet. We just introduced a lot of these topics today. So give yourself a break, tell yourself you had a good class, but also tell yourself you're going to go back and review it. You're going to look at your notes, you're going to look at the book, you're going to go back through the recording. Tell yourself you've got to expose yourself to agency numerous occasions to get it. Fair enough? Remember that 16 to 24 hours outside of work, outside of class I gave you guys? Here it is, starting with agency. So we're going to end here today. When we come back on Thursday, we're going to pick up, we're going to start talking about willful omission, negligent omission. And we keep going in Unit 7. It is 1 o'clock on the dot. Y'all have a great afternoon, and I will see everybody first thing Thursday morning. Bye. Thank you. Thank you.